Hey guys, tonight we board a creaky, tar-slick trade vessel in 14th century England. The sky overhead bruises with stormlight. The gulls shriek like squabbling monks, and every plank beneath your boots groans with foreboding. You're not a sailor, not really more of a scribe with wanderlust, but no one minds, as long as you stay out of the way and keep your boots dry. You tug your cloak tighter and scan the horizon. There's something about the water today that feels wrong. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it where you are? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You grip the rail as the vessel pulls away from the quay. It's called St. Mildred's Mercy, a rather optimistic name considering the weather. A few deckhands cross themselves, some out of piety, others out of habit. The wind carries the tang of salt and old fish. Somewhere below deck, someone's already vomiting. You pass chalky cliffs that rear up like broken teeth. The channel is fickle this time of year, and the captain knows it. He's a stocky man with a beard like rope and a fondness for muttering to a carved bit of driftwood in his pocket. Keeps the sea calm, he says when you ask, or at least makes it forget you're there. That morning, the dockmaster waved you off with a shrug and the words, "Hope you like swimming." Comforting. The first few hours are uneventful. You chew on dried apple slices and read over a cargo list scribbled in crabbed Latin bolts of wool barrels of ale, a crate simply labeled Bezoars. That last one makes you pause. You've heard of them hard clumps pulled from animal guts used to cure poison, but why ship them in bulk? Perhaps someone's expecting trouble. The ship creaks as it shifts with the waves. Somewhere off the port side, dolphins breach like gossiping old ladies. A light-hearted moment. But then the clouds darken. You've seen rain before, sure, but not this kind. The sky seems to cave in. Wind punches the sails with angry fists. Ropes snap. Sailors shout. One screams. You duck instinctively as a wooden spar flies past your head. The sea transforms. It's no longer the flat, glassy expanse of earlier. Now it's a living thing, heaving, roaring, dragging at the hull like a child trying to sink a toy. Someone yells that it's a witch's squall. Another blames the Bezoar box. You try to help, but mostly stay low, clutching your seat as the boat bucks like a panicked horse. You think you spot another vessel in the distance, a dark blot on the waves, but then it's gone. Or was it never there? The ship lurches. A barrel rolls across the deck and strikes the mast with a thunk. You hear a crack that sounds uncomfortably like bone. And then, quiet. Just for a moment. A sailor mutters that the storm came too fast to be natural. The last time we saw clouds like that, he says, was the year the Dutch fleet vanished off Zwin. You file that away for later. The storm returns with a vengeance, and someone starts to pray. Not loudly, quiet, and personal. You're not sure whether to join in or pretend not to hear. Salt stings your eyes. You can't tell if it's the sea or tears. Eventually, hours or perhaps just minutes later, the wind starts to die. The boat rocks gently, almost tenderly, as if the sea regrets its outburst. You look around. Several of the crew are injured. The captain is bleeding from the forehead, but still upright. Miraculously, you've survived. As the clouds lift, the sun breaks through indifferent golden and utterly silent. You think of how easily the sea could have claimed you. How many ships never made it back? How many stories were lost to the foam? Later, over cold barley stew, One of the younger deckhands tells you this route is cursed. Too many vessels vanish here. Too many sailors dream of screams underwater. Historians still argue whether these legends are sailors' yarns or the echoes of real maritime disasters, entire fleets wrecked their logs and ledgers devoured by time. You try to laugh it off, but the wooden beam above you still drips from the rain, and the deck beneath your feet never stops creaking. Imagine unlatching a wooden crate at sea and finding velvet slippers, a single eel fork, and a silver vial of perfume labeled in Arabic. Who packed these? Why were they aboard a merchant ship? And more strangely, why did no one claim them after the wreck? The morning after the storm is oddly bright, like the sky is trying too hard to convince you everything's fine. You emerge onto the deck, blinking like a mole. The wind has died down. The sails sag in the stillness, and there's a smell, not bad exactly, but strange salt pine pitch, and something faintly sweet. The captain's already barking orders, the kind that mostly involve swabbing things. You're spared, luckily being a guest has its perks. You slip down to the hold, a low-ceiling space filled with shadows, crates, and the soft squeak of rats holding board meetings in the corners. You're curious. After all, if you nearly died for this cargo, shouldn't you at least get to see what it is? The first crate is predictable bundled wool from Norwich, scratchy and smelling faintly of lanolin. The second holds barrels of ale, half of which seem to have broken open during the storm. The crew is likely to mourn those more than any lost sailor. But the third crate, that one's different. It's smaller, nailed shut with careful precision, and carries no visible marks apart from a faint crescent burned into the wood. You pry it open, half expecting snakes. Instead, inside lies a tumble of silk pouches. One contains perfume, a heavy silver vial with Arabic script etched along the side. You recognize it vaguely. Something about Damascus, perhaps. Another pouch yields a single eel fork, yes, specifically for eating eels. It's dainty and shaped like a trident for fairies. Beside it, a pair of velvet slippers, absurdly small, as if made for a child or a very stylish pixie. There's also a dried orange studded with cloves, and something that might be a letter, though it's water damaged beyond legibility. These aren't typical trade goods. They feel more like the contents of someone's travel chest. But whose the ship's manifest doesn't mention a passenger of note, at least not one matching this sort of inventory. You ask around. Most of the crew shrug. One old sailor squints at the fork and mutters that there's from the Oosterling ship's fancy lot from Bruges. Historians still argue whether merchant vessels like this often doubled as private couriers for nobility or smugglers. The line between the two was murky at best. You move on, finding more crates, each one a time capsule. One contains fine glass beads packed in straw. Another holds spices so pungent they make your nose itch from feet away. You sneeze violently and startle a nearby rat who flees in protest. Then you find it a crate labeled for Thorn Abbey. Inside 3 wax-sealed boxes, all bearing the same odd emblem, a scallop shell flanked by 2 lilies. Monastic deliveries. You try not to imagine the monk at the other end waiting for his box of mysterious goods, sipping bland soup and counting the hours. Yet among the pious items is one outlier: a book. Not a Bible. Not a psalter. A thin red-bound volume titled Herba Mundi, The World's Plants, illustrated and scribbled in Latin margins with side notes like "Do not ingest root" and "causes dreams of fire." You close the book gently. Hours later, as the ship drifts into calmer waters, the captain allows for a longer break. Most of the crew lounge men's sails or complain about the dwindling food. You bring up the odd mix of cargo. He grunts. Merchant captains, he says, ain't supposed to ask questions. Just sail the route, unload, and pray the buyers don't stiff you. He pauses. But sometimes, a crate goes missing, or shows up that nobody loaded. We had a bundle of Flemish candles once still warm. No one knew who brought them aboard. Lit one, and the flame was blue. You raise an eyebrow. Storm that night snapped our mast, he finishes. Coincidence, maybe. But sailors notice patterns. You nod, unsure what to say. He grins. Stick around long enough, and you'll see weirder. He's not wrong. Later, you chat with one of the younger crew members who says his cousin once worked on a ship transporting a singing fish. You laugh. He doesn't. They said it hummed Gregorian chants, he insists. You decide not to ask more. Before you turn in, you revisit the hold. The crate with the perfume vial still sits there quiet and unassuming. But someone's added a clove of garlic atop it. No one admits to doing so. Up on deck, the sea is calm and almost too still. The moon shines overhead, full and unusually yellow. The ship rocks gently, and you swear you hear faint chimes from the hold below. You know logically it's just the chains clinking. But logic seems to fray at sea. As you drift off in your hammock, lulled by the soft creak of wood and waves, your thoughts wander. Who packed those crates? What were they running from or toward in your dreams? Velvet slippers dance across the deck, trailing seaweed and whispers. There's a ritual you notice on the third day, sailors tapping the mast 3 times at dawn. No one explains it. No one questions it. What are they trying to appease or warn? And what happens if someone forgets? By the time the sun peeks over the watery horizon on the 3rd morning, you're feeling almost comfortable. You've found a rhythm aboard the St. Mildred's Mercy, a routine of morning sea air, mild bread soaked in weak ale, and occasional conversation with sailors who no longer treat you like baggage with feet. But something's changed. There's a nervous energy in the air. It's subtle, like the scent of a storm before the clouds form. You notice it first in the way the crew moves, more deliberate, less joking. The deckhands work in pairs. The helmsman hums a tune that sounds suspiciously like a lullaby. Then you see it. One by one, the sailors approach the mast and give it 3 firm taps with their knuckles. Not loud, just enough to be heard. Some do it casually, others solemnly. A few glance over their shoulders afterward. You ask about it. No one answers directly. One fellow offers a vague, "It's just how it's done." Another says, "Old ways matter out here," before walking off to coil rope that didn't need coiling. Eventually, it's the cook who gives you the best answer. He's a lanky man with wisps of beard and a perpetually flour-dusted apron. "See," he says, "slicing dried turnips with unnecessary vigor. Every ship's got its quirks. On this one, we tap the mast. Reminds the ship we're still here." You blink. The ship. He shrugs. Some say it's got a spirit. Or maybe the sea listens. Either way, no harm in manners. You try it the next morning. The wood is cool under your knuckles. There's no immediate reaction, of course, but you do catch the first mate watching you with a nod of approval. Superstition runs thick aboard seafaring vessels. Some of it makes sense, don't whistle. It invites wind, don't change a ship's name. Bad luck follows. Other rituals are more obscure. One sailor wears the same red sock every voyage on his left foot only. Another never eats the ship's apples. claiming they're cursed. Historians still argue whether these customs originated from real incidents or simply grew out of long, boring days and the need to explain the unexplainable. Some records from Genoese ports even mention ritual cargo blessings involving lavender oil and goat's milk. No one agrees if they worked. By midday, the ship approaches the narrow inlets near the Zwin estuary, once a thriving medieval trade hub, now a marshy labyrinth where more than a few ships have vanished. "Watch the birds," the captain says, pointing toward the sky. "If they wheel and scatter, we adjust course." You ask why. "Because the birds know where the sand moves." He's right. The sandbanks here shift like quicksilver. What was deep yesterday might be a foot of water today. The channel narrows, and the water darkens to a shade that swallows reflections. Suddenly, one of the deckhands yells. You rush over. There's something in the water. At first, it looks like driftwood. Then, the shape clarifies a figurehead bleached and broken. A woman's face, half gone, the remaining half still smiling. Nearby float tangled ropes and the remains of a hull barely visible beneath the surface. The sailors fall silent. One removes his cap. Another mutters a prayer. You've stumbled across wreckage. The first mate fishes out a plank with faded paint. It reads Lieve Meisje, a Flemish ship lost more than 20 years ago. According to legend, it set sail from Bruges with a hold full of stained glass and manuscript pages bound for a monastery in England. It never arrived. One sailor swears he saw this same wreckage 3 years ago, except then it was further north. The idea that wrecks can drift isn't strange. What unsettles you is how intact it all looks. The ropes aren't frayed. The plank shows no worm rot. How did it stay so preserved, you ask? No one answers. The captain simply steers the ship around the debris. You feel a chill despite the sunlight. Later, during a lull, you explore the lower deck again. The crate of velvet slippers is gone. You ask the crew. No one claims to have moved it. You check with the quartermaster. He says the manifest never listed such a crate. It's as if it was never there. You find a faint, wet footprint near where the crate once sat. Small. Too small for any of the men on board. No one seems to care, or perhaps they've learned not to. That night, you sit near the prow, watching the moon ripple on the waves. The sea's lull is both soothing and unsettling. It cradles you like a mother, and you wonder if it cradled the Lieve Meisje the same way right before she disappeared. A young sailor joins you, eyes fixed on the dark water. They say the sea remembers, he murmurs. You nod unsure whether he means the wreck, the slippers, or something else entirely. When you go to sleep, you dream again, this time of tapping wood, rhythmic and distant, as if someone below deck is still keeping time. One morning, you dock at a forgotten port, where the church bell tower leans like it's listening. The maps call it Zwin, but locals mutter a different name, the mouth that swallows ships. Why did a once bustling harbor vanish into mud, and what's still buried beneath its surface? The next leg of your journey takes you inland, or at least that's how it feels. The St. Mildred's Mercy glides into what once was a sea inlet, now narrow and silt-choked, flanked by reed beds and crooked willows. You've arrived at Zwin, or what's left of it. In the early Middle Ages, Zwin was a flourishing trade hub. Bruges merchants sailed from here with cloth and pepper ivory combs and delicate mirrors bound for England and the Hanseatic League. It was the kind of place where fortunes were made and lost on a good tide. But as you look around now, you see nothing but a sleepy marsh village, wooden docks slouched sideways, and a few weather-stained rooftops sagging under seagull colonies. The silence is muddy, not just quiet. It feels like sound itself is reluctant to linger here. The ship creaks as it docks, and the crew sets about trading what little cargo is meant for this place. Some barrels of ale cloth bales, and curiously a box of wax figurines. You're not told who ordered them, and no one's keen to elaborate. As you disembark, your boots sink slightly into the wooden planks. The air is damp and rich with the smell of old seaweed and rusting iron. You follow the winding dock road into the village, where buildings lean as if tired of holding themselves up. There's a church near the water, small and round, with a lopsided bell tower. A rusted weather vane spins without wind. You step inside. It's dim, but your eyes adjust. A few candles flicker. The pews are crooked. The altar is bare. But at the back, there's a strange carving, an old ship's hull cut in half and mounted like a reliquary. Inside the curve, protected behind iron bars, sits a single ship's bell green, with age and spotted with barnacles. A placard reads, Bell of the St. Juliana, lost at sea, 1264. Found buried in the marshes, 1432. Lost. Buried. Then somehow found. You ask the village priest, an elderly man, with one working eye and a voice like worn leather, how it was recovered. He shrugs. Sometimes the mud gives things back, but only what it wants to. You pause. Do you know what else is out there? He gestures vaguely toward the marsh. Wood, chains, bones, bits of lace. One year, we found a mast with a carved face still smiling. He says it like one might mention finding a mushroom after rain. Historians still argue whether Zwin was undone by nature trade shifts or divine punishment. Some say the estuary began to clog with silt due to Dutch damming efforts upstream. Others claim a curse was placed on the town after a merchant cheated pilgrims with fake relics, 3 toenails supposedly from St. Ursula. You wander the marsh edges. Occasionally, the wind shifts, and you hear what might be the clink of chain or the hollow knock of wood against wood. Could be birds, could be something else. Locals tell tales of the Dizanditter, the sand eater a ship swallowed whole by a sudden sandbank in 1297, all passengers still seated at table. No wreckage was ever found. Just a single goblet washed ashore, etched with the name Marietja. Further inland, you find the remnants of ship timbers poking out of the soil like ribs. Someone's tied cloth around them, as if they're part of a shrine. A child nearby throws pebbles into the mud and says she's trying to wake the sleeping ship. Back aboard that evening, the mood is subdued. Even the rowdiest sailor speaks quietly. You share what you saw: the bell, the bones, the ribboned timbers. The cook nods. Zwin's always been like that. Ships don't just wreck there, they settle, like they're waiting for something. You ask the captain why they still bother stopping here. Tradition, he says. And because sometimes you need to pay respects to what you ask. He looks at the marsh beyond, to those who stayed. That night the mist rolls in heavy and thick. The ship's bell rings once without anyone pulling the rope. You don't sleep deeply. In the morning, as the sun rises over the silt-colored water, you notice someone has tied a small velvet slipper to the mast. No one saw who did it. No one takes it down. What would you do if a shipwreck turned up in the middle of a dune field miles from any known shoreline? And how did salt-crusted ropes and barnacled timbers end up buried beneath inland sand? The real mystery isn't how the ship sank. It's how it got there at all. A few days after Zwin, the St. Mildred's Mercy veers inland via a branching tributary heading for a quiet port near the Dutch coast. It's a detour, one not originally planned, but the captain mumbles something about favorable timing and a fellow who owes me oysters. Neither seems especially urgent, which is why you suspect the real reason has more to do with curiosity than commerce. The town you approach doesn't appear on any map you've seen. It lies behind a curtain of dune grass, small and silvery in the early light, the buildings nestled low like they're hiding from the wind. A steeple peeks out, but just barely. The docks are simple, more like suggestions than constructions posts stuck into sand with old fishing nets draped like laundry. As you step onto land, a local greets the captain and gestures toward a narrow path winding between the dunes. The crew stays behind to offload goods, but you're invited to follow. You do. Of course you do. The sand crunches underfoot. It's soft pale and sprinkled with tiny shells, as though the sea forgot to take all its secrets with it. After nearly a mile, you reach a clearing among the dunes, and there it is. A shipwreck, but not in water. It lies cracked and listing in a shallow bowl of sand, half-buried ribs exposed to the sky. It's been there for centuries by the look of it. Timbers gray and gnarled metal fittings rusted to a soft crumble. Yet here's what makes it strange. This place is miles inland. There's no river near it, no channel, no ancient flood records, just a ship in the sand. The locals call it the Midden Boot, the Midland Boat. Some believe it sailed up during a once-in-a-century flood. Others whisper it was dragged inland by grieving families who refused to let their dead drift out to sea. Still, others think the dunes shifted, not the ship. There's a ladder propped against the side. You climb up cautiously. The deck is warped, but still walkable in places. The smell of old wood and dry salt fills your nose. Inside the hull, someone's made a kind of memorial. Bits of ribbon, candle wax, a few coins pressed into a crack. One coin bears the emblem of the Kingdom of Castile. Another has no markings at all, just a deep cross carved into one side. You ask your guide, an older woman with a wind-burnished face and practical boots, if anyone knows what ship it was. No record, she says. No name board. Just stories. You press further. There was a storm once, she finally offers, before my grandmother's time. Sea came much farther in. Carried fish into our root cellars. Might have carried this too. Historians still argue whether ships like this were marooned by natural disaster, tectonic shifts, or human hands. There's no official explanation, only partial guesses, and weather logs full of poetic phrases like waters did not respect their borders. You notice something in the sand beneath the bow, a carved beam separated from the rest. It's covered in barnacles that look long dead, fossilized into little towers. There's a mark on it, a simple ring with two vertical lines. It doesn't match any heraldry you've seen. A scholar might call it unattributed symbology. The locals just call it the ring that watches. Some claim when the moon is right, the barnacles glow faintly. Others insist that's just phosphorescent algae or tricks of the eye. You prefer not to decide. On your way back toward the ship, you spot another oddity. Half buried in the sand near a dune's base, a wooden comb. Plain except for the initials GV carved faintly along one side. You pocket it. Maybe someone aboard will know more. That evening, as the crew dines on smoked herring and stale biscuits, you share what you saw. The quartermaster, who normally has no time for nonsense, leans forward. I've heard of her, he says. A ship with no name that drifts in sand like a ghost in fog. Some say she was never meant to sail. You raise an eyebrow. She was built, he continues, but never launched. Keel blessed wrong. Compass placed, upside down. Superstitions, you know. Then how did it end up in the dunes, you ask? He shrugs. Ships go where stories need them. You sleep lightly that night. The wind in the rigging sounds like it's whispering. In the early hours, a sailor knocks on your door, says there's something you should see. You follow him on deck. Tied to the mast, a single coin, not from the local currency. It's Castilian, and it's wet. A priory submerged beneath the sea. A chapel bell heard underwater by divers who swear they didn't imagine it. And parchment fragments that somehow washed ashore dry. What happens when a monastery vanishes, not in fire or ruin, but in tide? And why did no one ever rebuild it? A few days after the inland detour, you return to open sea. The wind is cooperative, the sun warm on your face. The crew seems in better spirits, either from relief or short memory. You settle into the rhythm of sailing. Once again, the calls of gulls, the scent of brine, the distant promise of land that never quite arrives. That changes one morning when the lookout spots what he calls a stone finger poking from the water. It takes some time to approach cautiously. The water here is oddly calm, glass-like, reflecting the sky so perfectly you almost feel you're flying. Then you see it, a pointed shape breaking the surface, worn and sea-darkened. At first, you think it's part of a ruined dock, or perhaps a solitary tomb marker, but it's not. It's the tip of a church steeple. The closer you draw, the more details emerge. Beneath the surface, just visible in the clear water, lies the outline of an entire building. Walls, arches, and something like cloisters. Time and tide have softened the edges, but it's unmistakably a priory, a monastery beneath the waves. The crew grows silent. Even the captain says nothing, just steers a slow circle around the site. No one lowers anchor. One of the older sailors murmurs, "Saint Leontias." His tone carries both reverence and unease. You glance over. You've heard of it, aye. West of Wales. Washed away sometime in the 13th century, but no one knows when exactly, or why. According to some medieval chronicles, few and fragmented St. Leontias was a small priory built on what was once a stable coastal rise. Monks there were known for their illuminated manuscripts and an exceptionally sweet honey mead. It wasn't a wealthy place, modest, quiet. But one day, the records stop. No collapse recorded, no battle, just nothing. As if someone erased its ending. Historians still argue whether it was lost to erosion, a storm surge, or a land shift. A few argue it never existed at all, just a pious legend made up by fishermen. But the steeple says otherwise. You peer over the railing as the ship drifts closer. You can see what must have been the chapel windows. Glass long gone, but the stone arches remain like frozen music. And then something strange happens. You hear a bell. Not loudly, not clearly, but a definite dong. Just once. You glance around, heart skipping. No one else reacts, though. A few glance up, as if listening for something they can't quite catch. You don't say anything. Neither do they. Later, when the ship pulls farther away, you spot something floating just off the port side, a piece of parchment caught in a gentle whirlpool. It's dry. You retrieve it with a net. It's delicate, brittle, but legible. The ink is faded, but visible Latin script, the tail end of a psalm. The writing style matches early 13th century hands. The page bears a faint honey stain. No one claims to know how it surfaced. Back aboard, you try to trace the priory's location on a chart. The space is blank. A faint smudge of ink where a name might have been. You try to recall if anyone you've met ever mentioned St. Leontia before. They haven't. That night, you share what you found with the ship's carpenter, who seems less superstitious than the others. He nods slowly as he fingers the edge of the page. They say, when the sea takes something holy, it keeps it gentle. Unlike ships, which it snaps like twigs. You ask him why this place was lost. He shrugs. Maybe they sang the wrong hymn. Maybe they sang too well. You think of the bell, of the clarity with which you heard it, how it rang just once. The next day, the crew avoids sailing too close again. Someone reroutes the course subtly westward, without orders, and a sailor pins a scrap of linen to the mast. Stitched into it in awkward red thread is a bell. You ask no questions. You just write it down. A ship once drifted into view with torn sails, no lanterns, and a deck curiously scrubbed clean. When the dockhands came aboard, they found no one, not bodies, not belongings, just a sealed cabin that no one dared to open. What happens when a ship returns, but its crew never does? It's a calm golden morning when the St. Mildred's Mercy reaches a sleepy harbor tucked along the Cornish coast. The sails flutter lazily, and the sea looks like something out of a painting, serene and welcoming, as if it had never drowned a soul. The dock creaks under your boots as you step onto land, and for a moment you're grateful to feel earth beneath your feet again. But the harbor master is already waiting, and he doesn't look pleased. Tall, sun-leathered, and wearing a wool vest that might have once been navy blue, he strides down the wharf, stopping just short of the captain. "She's back," he says. "That's all?" The captain's jaw tightens. "Same condition?" The harbor master nods. "Drifting, clean, no crew." Your curiosity always sharp spikes. They speak in hushed tones for a few minutes. Then the captain beckons to you and 3 sailors. "We've been asked to inspect something. Bring oil lanterns, gloves, and respect." You follow them across the quay to where another vessel rests, moored, but barely. The lines are haphazard. The ship itself is in good shape. Its nameplate reads Maudlin Star, and from a distance it looks perfectly ordinary. But as you step aboard, the air changes. It smells like vinegar and lavender, a mixture too intentional to be accidental. The deck is spotless, not just tidy scrubbed clean. Even the scuppers are rinsed. There's not a drop of blood tar or seawater, and no one is aboard. No crew, no personal effects, no logs. The sails are lowered. The anchor is dropped. But the lanterns are dark, and there's no sign of recent cooking or movement. You check the forecastle. Empty. The hold empty, save for a pile of sand in one corner. No footprints. Just sand. The most curious thing, though, is the captain's quarters. The door is locked from the inside. You and the others hesitate. One sailor suggests breaking it down. Another suggests not. Eventually, the harbor master produces a key. It fits barely. The door swings open with a reluctant creak. Inside is a small cabin, neat and unassuming. A cot, a desk, a few books still stacked, a cup half full of tea. Cold. A logbook lies open, but the last page reads only, "Still drifting." Shore, nowhere in sight. Quiet. Unsettlingly so. No date, no signature. Historians still argue whether this event, or ones like it, were the result of diseased desertion or something stranger. Maritime records from the early 15th century include at least 6 separate entries marked ghost return ships that came back to port without anyone aboard. Back on the dock, a small crowd gathers. One woman, older and wrapped in a cloak of deep green, clutches a locket. "My son was on that ship," she whispers. 3 months ago. You glance back at the maudlin star. It doesn't look weather-beaten. It doesn't look 3 months adrift. It looks like it left yesterday. That night, the local innkeeper shares an old rhyme. If the sea brings back what once it took, don't open crates and don't dare look. If sails are clean and deck is dry, best let that silent ship float by. You laugh softly, but no one else does. Later, as you lay in your cot aboard the St. Mildred's Mercy, you hear the harbor bell ring once, then twice, then silence. You close your eyes, and in the dark, you smell lavender. Imagine finding a wreck, not stripped bare, but gleaming with untouched riches, gold florins tucked in linen-jeweled combs, nestled between scrolls. Why would locals leave treasure behind? And why do rumors say the coin-laden hull attracts odd tides that never appear on any chart? The captain calls it a side errand, but the way he checks the horizon before agreeing suggests something else. You're back on open water sails, full heading toward a spot that isn't marked on most maps. The crew doesn't talk about it directly. They say vague things like, near the jagged sisters, or past the place the compass skips. Eventually, you learn the name from a whisper between the cook and the ship's boy, St. Colette's Shoals. But the wreck isn't near the shoals, it's on them. That's where it was found years ago, wedged between two rocky outcrops like a pearl in an oyster. The ship never had a known name. No papers, no flag, just a hull stuffed with Florentine coins. Lots of them. No one's officially claimed it. No one's dared to. The locals believe the wreck is cursed, not because of superstition, but because of how untouched it remains. Gold attracts greed, yet this ship seems to repel it. Divers have tried. A few brought up coins, but their boats never made it home. The coins washed ashore a week later, bundled in someone's cloak. Naturally, the story drew the curious. And now, here you are. The approach is treacherous. Jagged black rocks poke from the waves like ancient teeth. The ship slows, threading through narrow paths. A sailor at the bow whistles quietly, watching for reefs that weren't there yesterday. Then you see it. Half submerged, elegant, eerily pristine. The hull's lower half lies beneath the surface, but the upper portion stands tall, tilted like a question. Moss clings to the rails. But the strangest part, gilded trim, still gleams in the sunlight. You climb into a rowboat with two others and row across the eerily calm water. When you reach the ship, the silence is thick, almost gelatinous. No gulls, no creaking. Just your oars dipping into stillness. You board carefully. The deck is stable, but soft in places, as if soaked too long in memory. Inside, everything is immaculate. You find satchels of gold florins packed neatly in oilcloth. There are silver-handled combs, pearls sewn into little linen purses, and scrolls. Yes, actual scrolls written in a script you can't decipher. No signs of chaos. No signs of haste. It's as if the ship wasn't abandoned, just paused. You reach a room in the aft section, where a low cabinet remains sealed. One of your companions starts to pry it open, but the other stops him. Last time, someone opened a chest here. He murmurs, they found their bed soaked the next night. Dry blankets, but the mattress full of seawater. You blink. Was the mattress aboard? No. It was at home. Historians still argue whether this wreck was a private courier, a royal treasury, or some lost diplomatic mission. The Florentine coins place it in the late 14th century, but the construction suggests an older hull. One scholar suggested it was a replica ship built as an offering rather than for sailing. You pocket a coin, not out of greed, but curiosity. It's warm. The others don't touch anything. Back aboard the St. Mildred's Mercy, you examine the coin under lantern light. The detail is extraordinary. Stamped with a lily on one side, a sunburst on the other. Around the edge, a phrase in dog Latin. Roughly translated, riches given never taken. You decide to return it. You row back the next morning early, just as the fog lifts. You place the coin where you found it. No drama, no whispering wind, just a sense of something aligning. On your way back to the ship, you notice the tides are wrong. The water moves sideways, not against you, not with you, just sideways. No one else seems to see it. That night, a crew member pins a tiny sunburst charm to the rigging. Just for balance, he says. You say nothing, but you watch the waves a little more carefully. A floating laboratory, a barge packed with alembics, astrolabes, and sealed vials labeled only with symbols. Its owner, a self-declared alchemist priest, with no parish and far too many sponsors. But when the barge vanished in a plume of steam, what exactly was he trying to turn into gold? The weather shifts as the St. Mildred's Mercy sails southward, edging closer to the bustling lanes between Flanders and France. The clouds hang low and metallic, mirroring the gray-green sea. The wind smells like tin and burnt time, if such a thing is possible. The captain seems to know where he's going, but there's a strange hesitance in his posture. You've sailed with him long enough to read his body language. His hands stay closer to the rail. His gaze flicks more often to the compass. At midday, he says almost casually, "We'll pass near Saint Armand's wake tomorrow." You don't recognize the name. The cook nearby drops a pan. That place again. The quartermaster mutters something that sounds like hope. It's cooled off by now. When you ask, the stories spill slowly, like syrup from a cold jug. About 100 years ago, a floating lab, a barge, technically sailed the channel, helmed by a man named Father Elric of Vézelay. He wasn't attached to any abbey. He wore priest's robes, yes, but also carried a silver serpent staff and never traveled without 6 cats and a boy named Echo. He claimed to be purifying metals for the church, supplying rare tinctures to monasteries. In reality, he was trading secrets, medical, astrological, philosophical, with anyone who could pay in parchment herbs or coin. His barge was legendary. Sailors called it the Sunbound, until one night it simply wasn't there anymore. Witnesses reported a plume of white steam rising from the horizon. No explosion, no wreckage, just vanishing. The tides ran hot that night, literally. Fishermen swore the water near the site was warm enough to blanch seaweed. You arrive near the coordinates by early afternoon. The area is quiet, the sea oddly calm. The crew lowers sails to drift. You lower a small glass orb tied to a string. A simple temperature test. The orb comes back lukewarm. That's not possible. The sea should be cold this time of year. You send it down again. Same result. The captain watches silently, then orders the ship move 10 lengths south. Another reading, normal temperature. One of the sailors jests. Maybe he made the sea into soup. No one laughs. You drop a sounding line. It hits something at 30 fathoms. Not rock, not sand. Something that gives slightly like cloth or wax. One crew member volunteers to dive. He returns with nothing but kelp, but he says the water felt thick. At dinner, the carpenter recalls an old story. Father Elric once invited a Dominican scholar aboard and fed him wine that made words float. The scholar never spoke again. The alchemist's clients included 2 bishops, a French prince, and allegedly a Saracen astronomer who wore shoes made of glass. None admitted to it publicly. Historians still argue whether the barge was real exaggerated or entirely metaphorical. Some suggest it was a kind of traveling myth, each port imagining its own version of the sunbound. But merchant records show inconsistencies, barrels of rare tinctures delivered with no source notes, signed only with a coiled serpent. Back on deck, the first mate finds something snagged in the anchor chain, a scrap of dark blue cloth etched with silver threads, a diagram, a spell. Hard to tell. The crew votes not to keep it aboard. You press it into a waxed pouch and store it in your journal. That night, you find one of the ship's lanterns flickering with blue light. No one lit it. The cats aboard, normally indifferent to everything, sit in a perfect line watching it. You decide not to ask why. A ship's hold revealed something no merchant manifest could explain: a bundle of children's shoes, all in pairs never worn. Nearby, tiny comb spoons and a wooden tablet with chalked numbers. Was this a family migration? Or something stranger? And why did no adult names appear in the records? The morning mist is especially thick today, clinging to the masts like cobwebs spun by a sleepy giant. You wake earlier than usual, drawn by a strange stillness outside your cabin. Even the usual shuffle of boots and the rattle of rigging seem muffled. When you step onto the deck, the ship is moored in a cove you don't remember approaching. There's a low coastline ahead, flat bramble strewn, with a few thatched roofs visible in the distance. The captain is already speaking to someone in a small boat alongside a wiry man in oilcloth with a bundle of keys at his waist. "Wrecks visible this week," the man says. "Barely. Depends how the tides behave." The wreck, you learn, is a recent find. Or rather, a refind. The currents here shift sand like curtains, briefly revealing things the sea would rather keep hidden. You join a small party rowing ashore and hiking along a damp trail flanked by salt-thirsty trees. Your guide says the wreck lies partway up a dune, now hauled inland, after being exposed by a storm. When you reach it, you stop cold. It's not just a wreck. It's a partial hull. Weather-beaten, yes, but solid, propped against wooden braces. A tarp partially covers it. Someone's made it into a shelter of sorts, though no one appears to live there now. Inside, they've cataloged what was recovered, and it's peculiar. The hold contained nearly 30 pairs of shoes, all child-sized, not worn down, not muddied, as if they'd been packed straight from a cobbler's shelf. Alongside them, small wooden combs, tin spoon slates with chalk marks still etched faintly, each item bundled in twine and linen. No adult belongings, no weapons, no coins, just small soft things. Your mind leaps to explanations. Maybe this was a merchant's delivery, but who ships only children's items without any invoice, any note? And then there's the strange part. In one corner of the hold, behind a loose timber, they found a slate. On it, a list of names. They are all first names only. Dozens. Some repeated. Some with odd symbols beside them, asterisks, half-moon spirals. The local historian who first documented the wreck believes it may have been a migration ship, a group relocating during one of the many regional famines. Perhaps these were supplies for a monastery orphanage, but there are no monastic seals. No signs of guidance or clergy presence, just shoes. You run your hand along the side of the hull. The wood feels smoother than expected, as if polished by hands, small ones. Back aboard the St. Mildred's Mercy, the find becomes a subject of debate. One sailor claims he's heard of child rafts, emergency boats, launched from burning towns. Another suggests it was some nobleman's strange legacy plan, sending children to safety elsewhere. You're not convinced. That night, you reread the list of names you copied from the slate. Most are simple Anne, Luca, Bram. One is odd. Nye, just that. Nothing else. When you mention it to the quartermaster, he stiffens. We had a cabin girl named Nye, he says slowly. She vanished 4 years ago. On this ship, no, he says. A different one. The Rosewell. It sank. No survivors. You don't press further, but you do go down to the hold that night, just to look. And there, resting between barrels, is a child's shoe. It wasn't there before. A royal bride set sail with dowries, silk-draped attendants, and an escort fleet, but never arrives. The weather was fair, the route familiar. Only a floating veil was ever found. Why did no rescue mission succeed? And why was her name later struck from multiple court records? The sky is unusually clear when the St. Mildred's Mercy sets a steady course toward the French coast. The wind hums in the rigging, the sea glittering with false cheer. The crew relaxes a bit, even airing out linens and humming old work songs. The sense of unease that's followed you this far seems to loosen its grip. But then the captain marks a spot on the map with his thumb. No name, just a wide patch of open water. He says, "We pass over her route tomorrow." You already know what he means. The legend is well known among seafarers and court historians alike, the doomed crossing of Princess Isabeau of Aragon. She was young, barely 17, and betrothed to a French duke in one of those political arrangements that makes everyone miserable, but keeps borders neat. The marriage was to be held in Rouen. Her journey began from Barcelona aboard a galleon named La Esperanza, accompanied by 2 smaller escort ships and a barge carrying her dowry. They set out in April. They vanished in April. No storms were reported. No enemy vessels spotted. No distress fires or washed-up wreckage, just a veil found tangled on a piece of driftwood near Saint-Malo. Pale silk embroidered with the Aragonese lion. The veil now resides in a monastery near Calais, pinned behind glass. You've seen it. It still carries the salt scent. As you near the region where she vanished, the wind dies, completely. The sails go limp. The ship slows to a crawl. The crew busies themselves with quiet tasks. No jokes today. The captain reads something from a letter he keeps folded in his jacket. You catch the phrase, "Daughters lost to water." He tucks it away. That night, the sea reflects the stars so perfectly, it's disorienting. Like sailing through the sky. Around midnight, a mist rolls in. Not thick, but silvery. You hear music. Just a few notes. Faint and fragile like wind chimes in another room. No one else reacts. But you notice a length of ribbon tied to the bowsprit. It wasn't there before. You ask no questions. In the morning, one of the sailors finds something caught in the railing net, a silver comb. Small, jeweled, clearly noble. No barnacles. No signs of time. You bring it to the captain. He holds it gently like it might dissolve. Dowry gift, he says. They say the sea keeps her vault tidy. Historians still argue what became of Isabeau's ship. Some say pirates. Others blame political betrayal. A few believe she never left at all, that the entire voyage was fabricated to cover a scandal. But sailors don't speculate. They mark the route. They nod. And they never say her name at sea. That night, as the ship finally catches wind again, someone ties a second ribbon beside the first. It flutters softly, even before the sails do. They found the boat bobbing near the fjords upside down, but sealed shut. When righted, it revealed nets, pickled herring, and crewmen preserved so perfectly They looked asleep. How did salt water stall time? And why did one man still grip a prayer token never issued in his era? Your route now curls northward, skirting colder waters. The sun arrives later in the morning, and the wind carries the bite of iron. The sails are heavier. Even the laughter on deck comes slower, like it's been chilled before reaching your ears. The captain calls it a watchful stretch, not cursed, but cautious. By midday, a shout from the crow's nest breaks the stillness. Something's bobbing ahead in a small bay nestled between slate-colored cliffs. You approach with care. It's a fishing boat, narrow Norse in design. Not new, but seaworthy. Or rather it was. Now it floats belly up, half-submerged hull, glinting with salt crust and bits of moss. You anchor nearby. A small crew, including you, rows out to investigate. It takes all of you to turn the boat over. It groans like something waking. Once righted, it rocks oddly heavier than expected. The hold is sealed but not locked, just bound shut with what looks like linen cord and a twist of braided seaweed. Inside, the air is sharp with salt and smoked fish. Rows of herring lie in barrels undisturbed. Ropes are coiled, nets folded, but it's what sits slumped at the stern that makes everyone go still. 3 men, preserved. Perfectly, not mummified, not bloated, preserved. Their skin is taut but supple, hair in place, clothing crisp. One even has his cap on askew at a rakish angle. They look asleep. One sailor whispers, "They're pickled." Another mutters, "Mirrored time." You lean closer. One man clutches a small medallion, an iron prayer token stamped with a bishop's seal. Only. The seal doesn't match any on record until 80 years later. The man's beard is streaked with sea salt, but his hands are clean. No signs of struggle. No wounds. Just rest. Historians still argue whether this phenomenon is natural. Saltwater cold temperature is a lucky air pocket, it happens. Rarely. But it happens. But no one explains the seal, or why their last catch was still fresh salted and stacked neatly like they expected to return to port any hour. The fishing log preserved in oilskin reads, "Catch is light today." Wind rises. Joran sang again. "We'll head back soon." Dated 1381. And yet the handwriting matches a style no earlier than 1450. The boat bears no name. The only identifying mark is a carved fish upside down on the prow. Back aboard the St. Mildred's Mercy, the crew keeps quiet until someone notices something. One of the barrels smells off. You open it. Inside herring, perfectly preserved. But no one brought it aboard. It wasn't there yesterday. That night, no one eats fish, and someone quietly drops the barrel back into the sea. The next morning, it's gone, but a piece of linen floats near the stern, braided with seaweed. One salvage crew hauled up fragments of a sunken bell. Not remarkable until they realized it matched a monastery's missing bell, and the monks who vanished with it. Why would an entire order risk sailing with sacred bronze? And why do their chants still echo when the tide drops? The fog rolls in thicker today, clinging to the sails like old breath. The sea has gone quiet, not still, just cautious. Even the wind whispers, the kind of day where sound carries farther than it should. The captain tells you you're approaching Tidebreak Reach, a stretch known for submerged hazards and the remains of too many vessels to name. But today, he says, you'll pass over something older. Something with cloth on it, as he puts it cryptically. By late morning, the ship glides into a shallower patch of sea, where breakers gnash against half-buried rocks, and the charts are peppered with vague warnings, like echoes possible and survey incomplete. That's when you hear it. A low tone, like a bell. Not a clanging or chime, just one sustained note. Deep, distant, felt more in your teeth than your ears. You glance at the others. A few pause. One sailor looks up sharply, then shakes his head. The captain doesn't acknowledge it at all, but you know what you heard. Later, the carpenter shares a story over black tea and stale biscuits. He says a salvage crew came through these parts years ago, chasing rumors of a sunken cloister ship, a kind of floating monastic bark that had ferried monks and their sacred objects from one priory to another. According to scattered reports, it was called the Pax Cordis. Its cargo, an enormous bronze bell, cast in a rare alloy intended for a new abbey. The ship vanished in fair weather, never reached its destination. No flotsam ever found, until that salvage crew dropped anchor here. They raised not planks or coins, but pieces of metal, curved, greened by centuries. One fragment bore a Latin inscription, Fiat Pax Super Undus, let peace be upon the waves. The shape matched a bell. Historians still argue whether such a vessel would risk transporting something so sacred by sea. Bells were spiritually important, meant to ward off evil, to mark time, to anchor sound to heaven. And these monks apparently sailed with theirs bolted to the deck. You wonder what happened that day. The carpenter says when the salvage crew returned, their bell fragments went missing from storage. Every piece. No one broke in. The locks were untouched. The only clue a faint salt ring where the box had stood. You peer overboard later, watching the light shift under the waves. You see nothing, until the fog clears slightly. A shape glides beneath the surface. Long, low, with ridged sides like a hull. And then just for a breath, you see the bell. It sits upright on what might be a deck of algae dark planks. Whole, untouched, silent. Then it's gone. Back aboard, the wind picks up. One sailor finds rope around the mizzenmast twisted in a figure eight. No one tied it. At nightfall, as the ship creaks gently at anchor, someone hums. A slow, steady chant. No one claims it. You don't ask. But you sleep lighter than usual. A fragment of parchment. A sketch of stars. A coastline not meant to exist. When divers recovered the map from a sunken chest, scholars dismissed it until they dated the ink. Could this chart show the Americas centuries early? And if so, who dropped it into the sea? By now, you know better than to be surprised. Strange finds, misplaced relics, unnamed vessels. Each stop of your journey has offered another puzzle, another echo. But this one might be the loudest yet. The St. Mildred's Mercy is gliding along a southern current when a signal comes from a nearby skiff, a lone fisherman waving a cloth, not in distress, but in invitation. The captain adjusts course. It's a known contact, he says. Bit of a collector. The fisherman turns out to be more than that. His name is Mestre Alano, and he operates from a low, timber-framed hut on a rocky spit. The walls are lined with tools, ropes, and drying herbs. But the real treasures are in his weatherproof chest, carefully cataloged items pulled from the sea across a decade. He's a quiet man, but eager to share. And today, he's found something unusual. From a leather pouch, he removes a rectangle of thick parchment, water-stained but intact. On it, a partial map. Inked in brown and dark green, faint but visible. You see coastlines, some recognizable, others not. One section shows part of Western Europe, but the landmass to the west doesn't resemble anything from medieval atlases. It resembles a continent, the New World, or at least something like it. The coast curves too sharply. The inlets don't match modern charts. But it's there, a land across the sea, labeled only with a single word, Terra Septem, the land of seven. You exchange glances with the captain. The ink has been carbon tested, Mestre Alano says, early 1300s. And here's the twist: it wasn't found in a bottle or buried in a chest. It was pressed between planks of a sunken cargo crate recovered near the Bay of Biscay after a storm unearthed the wreck. Inside that crate, wax-sealed letters in medieval Catalan, traded wool, a broken astrolabe, and this map. Historians still argue whether it's a forgery. Some suggest it's a distorted view of Iceland or Greenland, but others whisper of rogue navigators, Moorish sailors, Venetian defectors, Norse survivors who may have crossed further than anyone dared admit. But if they did, why keep it secret? Why drop a map into a crate of wool and let it drift into obscurity? You ask Mestre Alano whether he found anything else aboard that wreck. He nods once. A journal, not a long one, just a few pages, torn, barely legible. But one phrase repeats, written in the margins: "We turn not back." You sit with the map for a long time. On the ship that night, the quartermaster examines it too. He says nothing, but pins a compass rose to the map wall near his bunk. Not for navigation, for memory. That evening, a young sailor points out a cluster of stars you haven't seen before. "They're new," he says. You shake your head, just unfamiliar. And then you pause, because you recognize them. They're on the map, above Terra Septem. No name on the hull, no distress call, no wreckage. Just the sudden silence of a ship that never reached its port and was never seen again. How do you trace something that left no trail? And what does it mean when the sea gives no answer, only a ripple? The final stretch of your voyage passes quietly, too quietly. The sea has turned glassy, reflective, unnervingly smooth. Even the creak of the St. Mildred's Mercy's timbers seems subdued, as though the ship itself is listening. You ask the captain what lies ahead. He taps a spot on his chart with no label, just a faint smudge of ink, perhaps accidental. "Used to be a route," he says, "but not anymore." He explains that decades ago, there was a ship merchant class, well crewed, and bound from Bordeaux to Bristol. Standard course, clear weather, no political tension, no piracy zones. The ship was called the Antelope of Louth. It set sail and was never heard from again. No debris washed ashore, no messages in bottles, no returned goods, no rumors of betrayal or storm. It just vanished. And the strangest part, a second ship. The Amarine had launched from the same port 2 days later on a near-identical course. Its logs mentioned seeing another vessel far on the horizon, dark sails fast moving, but then losing sight of it as the wind shifted. The captain of the Amarine later noted that the sea went still for 2 full hours. Not dead calm still. That was the last possible sighting. The spot where it vanished became known as the Fade. Historians still argue whether it's real. Maybe the ship was renamed and repurposed in secret. Maybe it foundered quietly and slipped beneath the surface whole. But if that's the case, why was not even a splinter found? You pass over the location by late afternoon. The crew doesn't mark it. No bells, no flags, but no one sings. The sea is a mirror. For a moment, you glimpse your own ship reflected beneath you, not on the surface, but as if sailing below. A perfect twin. No waves, no wake. Then it's gone. Later in the logbook, you write, "Passed through the Fade. No sign, no song." That night the wind returns gently. You feel it first on your cheek. The sails stir. The ship exhales. and in the sky a single star appears where none had been. As the St. Mildred's Mercy turns toward home, you look back once. The horizon is empty. The sea resumes its slow rhythm. And whatever happened to the antelope of Louth, whatever place it slipped into, is content to keep its silence. Our journey now begins in Brittany, in a harbor so drowned in mist and myth that sailors used to call it the Port of the Mists. It once welcomed barefoot pilgrims by the thousands, yet now most maps pretend it never existed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere far away, or at some strange hour post, your city, and local time below, I love seeing where we're all drifting off from. Now dim, the lights maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive just as the fog thickens, boots sinking into wet sand. There's no road sign, just seaweed-draped stones that once framed the entrance to a village now erased by the tides. Locals still whisper the Breton name Porte-Naval, meaning harbor of wind, though it's rarely spoken above a murmur. Centuries ago, this was the place where pilgrims bound for Mont Saint-Michel would gather their cloaks, soak their bones, weary, their minds focused on salvation, or at the very least dry bread and shelter. You're a day too late, of course. The tides here are not like anywhere else in Europe. Twice daily, they rise and fall by nearly 40 feet, turning solid ground into shimmering abyss. Scholars still argue whether this harbor was lost slowly to erosion or suddenly in a 14th century storm, whose memory is kept only in a monk's erratic marginalia. You picture it as it was wooden piers stretching out like bony fingers into the bay gulls, shrieking overhead, fishmongers shouting in Old Breton. A bell used to ring each time a ship returned from the Abbey Islands. But now, only the bell frame remains, tilted like a snapped neck, and the bell itself, a rumored relic forged from broken sword hilts, was last seen the year Jean de Clisson took to piracy. Today, even the land refuses to behave. You walk 20 paces forward and feel the sudden give beneath your foot, peat no rotted planks, a buried dock. Possibly. Or perhaps just driftwood staging an impromptu graveyard theater. You sit on a stone and look out. Somewhere out there, pilgrims used to sing hymns to drown out their seasickness. Now the only music is the slow, wet suck of the marsh reclaiming its own. You might laugh if it weren't all so absurdly melancholy. Who builds a harbor where the sea eats everything? Well, medieval monks did, apparently. Their logic, the holier the ground, the harder the journey. And this was the hard start. If you reached Mont Saint-Michel after sailing from here, you'd earned your blessing with blisters. Modern archaeologists occasionally descend here during the extreme spring tides when the ocean retreats as if embarrassed. They've found pottery shards, rusted nail heads, and once a buckle shaped like a scallop shell, the symbol of pilgrimage. But still, no one can agree if this was truly a port or just an elaborate tidal puddle with good PR. You close your eyes. Fog curls like incense around your shoulders. The silence hums. Somewhere out in that mist, someone's lantern still swings a trick of the light, maybe, or the last pilgrim always arriving late. Somewhere beneath the still surface of a forgotten inlet, a bell tolls, but no one hears it. What monastery built its watchtower on shifting tides? And why would they build it? Where waves now whisper through stained glass windows. If monks still kept time here, who exactly are they ringing for? You push off from the shoreline, imagining yourself in a little round coracle no bigger than a wash tub. The air is calm, but loaded like it's holding its breath. The fishermen of the nearby coast call this stretch La Sonne Engloutie, the drowned bell. And while that name sounds poetic, the place itself is unnervingly literal. There's a shallow stretch of the bay that, when the tides and moon align, just so exposes the remnants of what appears to be a stone structure, flat, weather-beaten, but unmistakably symmetrical. Underwater acoustics researchers once lowered sensors here and picked up low bell-like vibrations. They blamed it on shifting rocks and ocean currents. But locals insisted the bells belonged to a monastery swallowed by the sea in the 13th century. And if you squint just right, you can still see the spire. You arrive at low tide, boots crunching on wet shell and wrack. Ahead in a shallow depression stand 3 stone columns each, barely 4 feet high now, but once part of a bell tower visible from 5 leagues away. There's no sign of a chapel, just these lonely markers, and a strange groove carved deep into one of them, as if ropes once sawed back and forth across the stone year after year. The strangest part, they're perfectly aligned, not just with each other, but with the ancient trade route that passed this coast. Historians still argue whether this was a beacon or a station. Was it meant to guide ships or pray for them? You imagine the monks standing in their sea-soaked robes pulling on ropes that rang iron bells above their heads. These weren't grand carillons like in the cathedrals. No, they were crude things cast by local smiths and tuned only by accident. But in the fog, that uneven ringing sounded like music. Not comforting music, mind you, more like the soundtrack to a long, damp wait. One record remains of this place, though it's barely more than a scribble, a 12th century shipping ledger noting anchored near the bells, no shore. That's it. Just that line. No town name, no coordinates, only the bells. For centuries afterward, sailors would mark their maps with little hand-drawn symbols here. Some used a bell, others a fish with a cross through it. By the 1600s, the sound had stopped. The last known report came from a Dutch merchant who wrote that his crew heard the sea chiming one night and swore they'd seen lights hovering above the water. He never returned to port, but the entry remained in his logbook, which now lives in a dusty archive in Ghent. Today, marine archaeologists have found a few scattered artifacts, segments of chain, what might have been a brass censer, and a slab, etched with Latin, too eroded to read. A few enthusiastic scuba divers have tried to find more, but complain that visibility's always worst right above the site, as if the silt doesn't want to settle. As the tide begins to creep back in, you crouch beside one of the columns. A windless breeze, yes, that's a thing now, curls past your ear, and for half a second you think you hear it. A faint metallic clang, distant but deliberate. You shake your head. It could be anything. Buoys anchors your own imagination. And yet, one local legend says that if you hear the bell, it means someone from your bloodline passed through here long ago. Another insists that the monks still ring it beneath the sea, tending their underwater abbey like nothing's changed. Most historians, of course, are skeptical. They believe the so-called bell sounds are caused by tidal flow interacting with submerged cavities in the stone. Perfectly plausible, they say. Perfectly dull. But as you wade back to shore, soaking your hem and regretting your shoe choice, something behind you lets out a hollow clonk. Not loud, not urgent, just enough to make you turn. Nothing, only water. They say the sea doesn't keep secrets, But what if it never knew the truth to begin with? What happens when a harbor appears in dozens of maps, yet no one can agree where or whether it truly stood? Tonight, you chase a ghost port so well remembered it may have never existed. You walk along a shallow bluff, overlooking the Baltic, where the waves flicker like coins under a pale sky. The ground is firm, grassy, almost unremarkable. And yet, every few steps, something interrupts the landscape: a curve of brick, a lichen covered post, a suspiciously linear pattern in the soil. You're standing where some believe Veneta once rose, a fabled merchant city said to rival Constantinople in wealth and mystery. Except no one knows exactly where it was, or even if it ever was. Veneta is the shimmering ghost of maritime legend, a port city, stone-built and cosmopolitan, filled with towers and gold, and people who spoke more languages than a university library. Chroniclers from the 11th century describe it as a glittering hub of trade between the Slavs, Scandinavians, and Byzantines. Arab geographers mention it vaguely. German monks obsess over it in footnotes and sidebars. But every attempt to locate it ends with a shoulder shrug and an eroded coastline. Still, here you are, somewhere between modern-day Poland and Germany, near the island of Usedom. Several sites compete for the honor of being Old Veneta. Archaeologists have uncovered submerged stone foundations offshore, which may belong to some medieval settlement. But are they the Veneta? That's the debate. Historians still argue whether Veneta was ever more than a collection of towns stitched together by salt roots and imagination. You crouch near a shallow tide pool and stare at a mossy slab. Could this have been a warehouse, a dock, or just a very determined boulder? Scholars have proposed that Veneta wasn't a single city, but a mythic amalgam born when sailors returned home, with slightly exaggerated tales of a particularly well-stocked market. But the legends disagree. They tell of a city so proud and impious that it sank beneath the sea as punishment. Others say it was merely abandoned its harbors, filled in by sandstorms from the shifting barrier islands. You pick your way down toward the shore, where the sand becomes suspiciously crunchy. Clam shells, possibly. But you spot something else, a patch of weathered tile half exposed and glinting like damp bone. Not Roman, not modern, something in between. The shape of it suggests drainage, or maybe anchoring something meant to hold, not move. Folk stories say that when the wind is just right, you can hear Veneta's bells underwater. Others say fishermen have caught pieces of jewelry in their nets, rings, medallions, a single brooch shaped like a griffin. The griffin is important. It appears on old German crests, but also on the border carvings of churches farther south. It may be a clue, or just a popular design. You pause beside a crooked fence post where someone's tied 3 blue ribbons. Wind flutters them gently. A recent tribute, or a tradition older than memory. One 13th century priest insisted he visited Veneta in a dream. He described mosaic floors, tiled fountains, and sea lanterns made from the bones of whales. It's likely poetic invention, but some dreamers have good memories. His account matches the architecture of several sunken ruins off the Pomeranian coast. Another theory: Veneta was swallowed not by divine judgment, but by the market. As trade routes shifted and silting increased, harbors farther west became more lucrative. The city, unable to keep up, simply fell off the charts like a trendy restaurant with no parking. You reach a low ridge, where a series of rocks jut in a suspiciously straight line. They extend into the water, perfectly spaced. Mooring stones. That's the guess. or the hope. A recent sonar sweep showed symmetrical voids beneath the sediment spaces where buildings may once have stood. The team ran out of funding before they could dig. Still, the mystery remains oddly soothing. There's comfort in the not knowing. The sea laps at your boots as if trying to nudge you forward, as if Veneta will show itself only when you're not looking. You close your eyes. Somewhere, a gull cries. A cold breeze flicks your collar. For a brief second, you imagine the city whole bright sails in the harbor, spices in the air, stone towers above merchant stalls all set against a horizon where myth meets mist. And then it's gone. You've seen drowned towers and whispered cities, but what about ports that were never meant to be found in the first place? What happens when a harbor serves a mission no one admits existed? Our next stop, a windswept Baltic inlet said to have hidden fleets, secrets, and perhaps even a few forgotten crusades. You trudge inland from the coast, following a narrow trail, lined with pine and low fog. The wind here feels strategic, just strong enough to erase tracks. According to fragmentary letters and military logs, somewhere near this bluff once stood an anchorage used by the Teutonic Knights, those white-cloaked warriors of medieval myth and very real logistics. Unlike the grand fortresses of Malberg or Königsberg, this place was never marked with banners or stone. Instead, it lived and vanished between maps. Some call it the Forgotten Anchorage, though that name is a modern convenience. To its users, it was simply the inlet. Quiet, sheltered, and far from cities where questions got asked. You pause where two boulders flank a sunken depression, almost like an entrance. Beyond a slight ridge of crushed shell and timber stretches toward what would have been deep water in warmer seasons. Local historians have scoured this coast, identifying layers of charred wood bits of rusted ironwork, even fragments of rope threaded with dyed wool, suggesting not fishermen, but disciplined uniformed personnel. What was it for historians still argue whether this anchorage supported minor crusading missions, or something more clandestine, like supply drops for northern allies who were not entirely sanctioned by Rome? The Teutonic Order was known for strict record-keeping, yet here, the paper trail disappears. One surviving letter, penned by a Baltic merchant in 1317, mentions a cold haven where black salt and wax are exchanged under silent agreement. Black salt could be a spice euphemism, or more intriguingly, gunpowder. Wax was essential for sealing not just letters, but deals. The inlet also happens to sit within half a day's march from a now vanished village known only from burial records. No church, no tax rolls, just graves. One theory suggests it housed the crews who worked the anchorage men, whose job it was to never ask questions, only to unload, load, and leave. You imagine the operation. A ship arrives at twilight sails, already lowered hull, darkened with pitch. No greetings, no chance. Just boots on creaking planks, and the soft shuffle of crates hitting earth. Lanterns are covered. Orders are whispered. Then they're gone again, swallowed by mist and politics. In one account, an anonymous monk describes a shoreline where the ice moaned as if under oath. It's poetic, sure, but it matches the seasonal ice flow patterns in this region. These waters freeze fast and unpredictably. Only those who knew every eddy and rock could navigate it without cracking their hull. You find a splintered wooden post, half charred, capped with rusted iron. It could be anything. A fence, a mooring, or the last stub of a pier that never appeared on charts. Nearby, a shallow cave opens in the hillside. Inside, you find soot, modern possibly. But buried in the ash is something strange, a round iron object shaped like a flattened acorn. You brush away the dirt, it might be a counterweight, or even a makeshift seal stamp. Someone once spent time here quietly and efficiently. Whether they were knights or smugglers or something in between remains murky. A whisper of snow begins to fall, lightly coating everything in fragile silence. You stand still. The wind presses inland now, as if the sea itself is trying to reclaim this place from memory. You take one last look at the inlet, empty innocent until it's not. Imagine a harbor you could only reach if your heart was clean. Not crime-free clean, but mythically, impossibly pure. What if a dock existed that judged you before letting your boat approach? Tonight, we explore the whispered tale of a holy landing that shows itself only to the worthy or the wildly lucky. You arrive at the edge of a wind-carved cliff, high above a quiet cove on a forgotten stretch of Atlantic coastline. The path here isn't marked. In fact, most maps don't even label this section of the coast, just a blurry green smudge with vague altitude lines and a suggestive curve labeled Anse Blanche. But among sea pilgrims and medieval mystics, it goes by another name, Wharf of the Sea Saints. No one quite agrees where it is or was. The stories are always secondhand. My grandmother's brother saw it once, or a monk from Galicia wrote about it in a letter now eaten by mice. But the descriptions match eerily, so white rock cliffs, a single carved step into the sea, and a wooden dock with no nails, just dovetail joints, smooth as bone, gleaming as if it had never seen a storm. The catch: it only appears to the pure of heart, or maybe just to the overly tired and underfed. Many of the reports came from people who'd been fasting sailing for days or escaping something. That's the paradox. The more desperate you were, the more likely you were to glimpse it. But not everyone could reach it. Some said their boats simply wouldn't steer toward it. Others claimed they rowed for hours, but got no closer. One merchant wrote that he could see the dock clearly, but his oars snapped as soon as he tried to approach. Historians still argue whether this legend is a misremembered monastery port or a metaphor gone rogue. The idea of a moral harbor isn't new. Saints and sailors often mingled metaphors. But the consistency of details, gleaming dock unmarked, inlet sudden vanishing, has scholars scratching their heads. There's even a 15th century coastal survey with a curious note beside a blank stretch. Here be no port unless your conscience guides. You begin your descent toward the cove. It's steep but manageable, thanks to narrow switchbacks, carved by centuries of goat hooves and secret seekers. Partway down, you pass a smooth pillar of quartz that almost looks placed. A marker, maybe, or a natural accident given spiritual promotion. The wind quiets as you near the bottom. The usual sea chatter gulls, spray distant breakers, goes oddly still. Even your boots make less sound on the wet stone. Then you see it, a shallow shelf of limestone curving into the bay. Nothing fancy, no carvings, but oddly inviting. There's no dock, not now at least. You close your eyes. Imagine it a single timber pier, stretching into waters as calm as prayer lanterns lit by nothing visible. No boat tied to it, but always waiting. Who built it? When, and more importantly, why would a place like this ever be needed? Theories abound. Some say it was for monks who refused to sail with sinners. Others say it was the landing point for a particular relic, a holy nail, a tear-stained veil, a finger bone of someone important. Still, others claim the wharf exists in another time and occasionally overlaps with ours like a dream caught in the wrong bed. You sit on the stone and pull out the small wooden medallion you bought from a roadside vendor earlier that week. He'd said it was carved from a tree near the White Cove and that it liked good people. The phrasing had felt unsettlingly specific. You rub your thumb along its smooth surface. Nothing happens. Of course not. But for a moment the breeze shifts, and there just beyond the surf, a shimmer no a shape. It could be seafoam, could be a sandbar, or it could be a wooden path gleaming like it's been waiting centuries for you to notice. Then a gull cackles, a wave slaps the rocks, and it's gone. How many cities do you think you've walked on without knowing? What if the street cafe you passed today was built atop an ancient jetty buried layer by layer beneath new lives and cappuccinos? Beneath modern Amalfi's polished facades lies a staircase that once led straight to the sea and to somewhere very different. The clatter of scooters and the scent of espresso may dominate Amalfi now, but your feet trace a route far older than today's tiled sidewalks suggest. Beneath this thriving town lies the whisper of an older pulse, one carved in stone, wrapped in salt, and muffled by centuries of renovation. You follow a side alley, narrow-shaded, barely wide enough for two cloaked figures to pass shoulder to shoulder. It ends in a squat door, half sunk into the hill. What lies beyond isn't on the tourist maps. Your guide, an amateur historian named Claudia, who insists she's just curious, unlocks the old storeroom and waves you in. At first, it's dark and cool, typical of any medieval subcellar. But as your eyes adjust, you see it a wide stone staircase, 12 steps descending at a gentle angle, and going nowhere. Just stone sea-pocked and water-stained, vanishing into a wall that was clearly added later. Claudia explains that this used to be one of the access points to Amalfi's ancient port before silt earthquake rubble and urban expansion buried it. You can still smell the ocean on the steps, that briny metallic tang that doesn't come from pipes or fresh air ducts. The port beneath the city was once the beating heart of maritime trade. Between the 10th and 12th centuries, Amalfi rivaled Venice. But while Venice preserved its canals and made them postcards, Amalfi let hers sleep. Archaeologists rediscovered these stairs in the 1980s almost by accident. A renovation project went sideways when a contractor broke through the floor and found a vaulted corridor leading to these steps. They go down, but also backward in time. Records show this area once connected to a network of sea tunnels accessible at high tide by small cargo boats. Historians still argue whether the tunnels were meant for trade or defense. Some suggest they allowed merchants to load goods unseen, protecting them from theft or taxes. Others believe they were escape routes designed to let officials vanish in a pinch. Either way, they worked. You run your hand along the stair's edge. It's smoother than the rest, worn by centuries of calloused palms and hurried exits. In the far corner, someone's etched a small fish into the stone, a crude carving, possibly a symbol of a merchant guild. Or just someone bored during a long wait for the tide. Claudia lights a lantern and leads you deeper. Past the stairs lies a short tunnel, reinforced by timbers that are newer than they look. The air turns cooler, tinged with something both ancient and organic. There's a current, she murmurs. Sure enough, you feel it faint, but real, as though water still passes nearby, threading under modern plumbing, like a stubborn ghost. You reach a dead end, or rather a wall. But this one is older than the others, stacked stones dry-fitted with a mason's precision. Claudia knocks twice. The sound is solid, but not hollow. There's space behind it, just no easy way in. This, she says, was where the dock actually began. some 15 feet behind that wall, they believe is what remains of a Roman to medieval transitional jetty. If true, it would be one of the only intact examples in the region. But excavation would mean tearing through two modern shops and part of a pedestrian street. Not exactly popular with the local tourism board. So it waits, buried, patient, occasionally flooding a basement or warping a floorboard above. You retrace your steps, each footfall slightly echoing. Back outside, the sunlight feels oddly loud. Tourists click gelato selfies just 50 feet above what was once a gateway to the known world. You pause just outside the alley and listen. For a second, under the hiss of a nearby espresso machine, you think you hear it a distant splash. Or maybe just the sea remembering. You'd think rough seas and storms would be a sailor's greatest fear. But what about a cove where the water's so calm it feels wrong? What if ships vanished on sunny days under cloudless skies with no distress? Calls, no debris, just silence. Let's visit the place. Cornwall forgot how to explain. You approach the coast from inland, following a trail lined with gorse and damp moss. Birds sing. The breeze is mild. It's the kind of morning that practically begs you to pack a sandwich and a thermos and make a day of it. But locals don't picnic here. Even the name Stillwater Cove feels like a dare. There's no signage, no beach huts, just a sloping path of flattened grass that leads down to an inlet shaped like a lazy spoon. The tide is low, the sand is pale, and the water flat as a table. Not a single ripple, not even where the breeze should have touched it. It's beautiful, but not in a comforting way. You stand at the edge and realize something odd. There are no boats. None on the water. None hauled ashore. Not even the usual collection of dinghies flipped upside down like sleeping turtles. It's as if the whole inlet was politely but permanently declined by every sailor in Cornwall. And that's not an exaggeration. Historical shipping records list the cove by different names. Calm Hollow, the Soundless Mooring, Sea Mirror Bay, but they all agree on one thing. No ship that entered ever came back out. Not wrecked, not splintered, just absent. Historians still argue whether these disappearances are myth or misrecorded losses. Some point to hidden riptides or sudden fog banks. Others blame magnetic anomalies. But the strangest detail: every recorded departure from this cove happened on clear days under blue skies, often with full cargo and no known mechanical issues. One theory suggests that a particular underwater shelf near the mouth creates an optical illusion, making ships appear to vanish, when in fact they're drifting toward nearby headlands. But several recent sonar scans found no such shelf. Another hypothesis: a high concentration of underwater gas vents, harmless to humans, but enough to disrupt buoyancy and navigation. Again, no evidence. And yet the stories persist. A 17th century customs officer wrote that he watched a merchant brig sail into the cove in splendid light with all flags aloft, and that by the time he'd turned to summon his ledger, it had vanished. His diary is stored in a maritime archive in Exeter, right next to 3 other letters written decades apart, telling near-identical stories. You walk along the cove's edge and find an old iron cleat driven into the rock. Just one. No ropes, no matching pair. It's the kind of hardware used to secure mid-sized trading vessels, not something you'd install on a whim. Rust has rendered it almost unrecognizable, but you imagine it once held something taut, important, and now long gone. A small plaque nearby, clearly modern, bears a poem unsigned. They left at noon beneath the sun, with sails like wings, and voyage begun. No storm, No wind, no final cry, just salt and time and silent sky. Tourism officials claim the plaque as art. Locals call it a warning. You crouch near a tide pool, watching tiny crabs scuttle between barnacles. Everything seems normal, peaceful even. But every so often a patch of water out in the center of the cove shimmers, oddly, as if something just passed underneath. But there's no wake, no noise, just that ripple, and then nothing. By late afternoon, you've seen 5 such movements. Each lasts barely 2 seconds. Maybe it's a trick of light. Maybe there's a submerged current channel. Or maybe some questions are meant to be left quietly folded in the logbooks of time. You turn to go. The sun casts your shadow long behind you. It stretches toward the cove, dark and narrow, like a rope slowly pulling something back in. Next up, a harbor that didn't just glow with legend, it literally glowed. Why did Old Norse sailors speak of a jetty that shimmered green under northern lights? Was it trick lighting, bioluminescence, or something stranger? And if it existed, why did it disappear without even a splinter left behind? You arrive in Bergen under a wool-gray sky, the kind that drips instead of rains. The harbor is still active here alive with ferries and container ships and enough fish smell to make a vegan weep. But you're not here for the modern docks. You're looking for a smaller spot, a lost nook, possibly natural, possibly not tucked somewhere north of the city where fjord meets folklore. It's called, at least in the sagas, the glowing moorings. No one can quite agree what they were. Some say it was a carved stone pier, etched with runes that caught the light of the aurora and reflected it like a polished blade. Others claim it was made of some kind of driftwood washed up from a far land and imbued with something beyond ordinary explanation. But nearly every account shares one detail: it glowed. Not brightly, not like fire, but with a faint sea-green aura that shimmered only on the calmest, darkest nights. You climb a hillside path that overlooks one of Bergen's lesser-known fjord branches. A local guide named Eric walks beside you, chewing something that might be licorice or bark. The moorings were never in the same place twice, he says casually. That's what my grandfather said. He was a lighthouse keeper, saw lights dancing on the water with no sky above them. You ask if it could have been the aurora reflected on wet rock. He nods. Could have been. But he said the light moved, like it was choosing where to go. That idea sticks with you. At the crest, you reach a plateau with scattered ruins, just foundation stones really half consumed by moss. One particular slab bears a weathered groove in the shape of a crescent. Not a runestone, not clearly Norse, but old. Eirik kicks at it gently. Used to be boats here, small ones. Fishing, maybe. But my cousin says the old folk never tied anything here. Said the moorings were not to be anchored. You press him for details, but he shrugs. Maybe superstition. Or maybe they just liked their boats. Back in the 1300s, a Bergen chronicler described an oarless ship gliding to a quay that hummed with green fire. Some scholars believe he was metaphorically describing a holy vision or dream. Others suggest a phenomenon, now called triboluminescence, the brief light emitted when certain materials are crushed, rubbed, or fractured. Could ice against a mineral jetty cause this? Maybe. But again, no samples remain. In fact, no physical evidence of the glowing moorings has ever been definitively found. Still, the sightings persisted into the 19th century. A retired merchant navy officer once claimed he dropped anchor in a fjord arm during a storm and awoke to see green light spilling across his deck. His boat hadn't moved, but his compass spun for hours afterward. Eric leads you down to a rocky outcrop with a view of the water. There's nothing man-made here, just lickin' salt and the rhythmic hush of waves. But when the clouds break briefly and the late summer sun hits the water at just the right slant, something strange happens. The tide pools between the rocks seem to ripple in two directions at once. Not dramatic, not flashy, just wrong enough to notice. Eric doesn't say anything. He just watches. You sit, wait. The sky dims. No aurora tonight, but a flicker faint and green dances along a ripple no bigger than your palm. Could be algae, could be wishful seeing. But for a moment it moves with intent. You blink, and it's gone, just like the moorings themselves. Let's say you were carrying silk west and salt east, and you needed a stopover where no empire held sway. What kind of port could thrive between worlds and then vanish in a blink? Join us on the Ligurian coast, where the crossroads of silk and salt once stood, until the ground moved. You follow a winding cliff path above Italy's coast, where vineyards cling to the hillside like gossip. The air smells of thyme and minerals. This isn't tourist territory. It's older, quieter. Somewhere below, beneath sediment and silence, lies a place once known by merchants as La Riva dei Mondi, the shore between worlds. Modern maps don't show it, but fragments of medieval trade records hint at its role, a transient hub connecting Mediterranean salt from the Camargue with silk traveling from Byzantium via inland couriers. It wasn't big. It wasn't flashy. But it was perfect, just far enough from Genoa to avoid tolls, just close enough to the interior to swap goods without raising flags. You reach a collapsed terrace overgrown with fig and ivy. Local archaeologists believe this spot marks the upper edge of the old port. In the 1300s, it was bustling with stalls, sailcloth, and a whispering market, where prices were quoted in 3 currencies and 4 languages. Now, it's eerily silent. You descend a narrow cut in the rock, the ancient road still faint beneath your feet. Not far below, barely visible, lies the mouth of a buried tunnel, sealed long ago with quarried stone. This was once part of the cargo chute, where goods were lowered from cliff to ship with ropes and pulleys. One merchant's journal described it as a stomach for treasures. It swallowed crates and birthed coins. Historians still argue whether this port fell victim to nature or politics. Some suggest that a sudden earthquake in the late 14th century, recorded in 2 distant monastery chronicles, caused the cliffs above to collapse, effectively sealing the harbor in rubble. Others believe it was quietly erased by competing powers who found its neutrality inconvenient. You sit at the edge of a broken wall and picture its silk bolts draped across wooden tables, sacks of salt stacked like primitive snowbanks, voices echoing in dialects you've never heard. The dock wasn't made of stone, but of layered timber, reinforced with lead nails, a luxury meant to withstand decades of use. None of it remains, except one thing: a stone ring barely 4 inches wide embedded in the rock. It might have once held a tethering rope, or a lantern post, or something more symbolic. It's smooth unnaturally so, and faintly marked with overlapping lines like a woven knot. Someone placed it there carefully, and then nature, or negotiation, buried it. You stand brush dust from your hands and glance at the craggy wall to your right. Faint red markings appear when the light hits just right, trader's shorthand. Tally marks, no one's sure. But they match symbols found in Istanbul, Alexandria, and oddly, a cellar in Antwerp. A global signature from a port now invisible. You begin your return as the breeze shifts inland. The sea far below glints faintly, From here, you can't see a dock. But then again, neither could history for a while. Have you ever heard of a port that opens once a year? What sort of harbor operates on a calendar only the ice understands? And who were the sailors, patient or desperate enough to wait 11 months just to dock? Welcome to the Arctic's most mythical station, where legend frosts the ropes before they're ever tied. You arrive at the edge of a tundra plateau in northern Scandinavia, where moss clings low and the wind carries more memory than warmth. There are no roads here, just frozen silence stretching between ridges and the sea. And out there beyond a craggy spit of rock lies a small cove, long rumored to host the port that never opens. Except it does open, just barely, and just once. According to centuries of oral records passed down by Sami herders and whalers, this cove called Varmhaven, in dialect Warm Harbor, ironically briefly thaws every late July. Not enough for tourists, not enough for cargo runs, but just enough for the right kind of ship to slip in, load up, and vanish. You descend through a ravine of black stone boots, crunching frost even in midsummer. The route isn't marked. The last official map of this area was updated in 1912, and even that simply labeled the region seasonally navigable caution. Historians still argue whether the port ever saw regular traffic or was more myth than maritime. Yet some clues suggest it was real. Half-buried mooring posts line the shoreline, stone-based, iron-topped, arranged in a clean arc, unmistakably man-made. They're spaced precisely 22 feet apart, matching the standard layout of early Scandinavian merchant piers. The ground behind them slopes into what would have once been a staging platform, now overgrown with tundra sedge and squat birch. There's also the account of an English explorer, one Henry Barston, who wrote in 1594 of a mouth in the ice which yawned once a year, as if the earth herself did sigh. He claimed to have waited 13 days for the water to break before entering. Inside, he found a dock, 3 men in fur-lined tunics, and a cache of dried fish and polar hair. The port's purpose remains a riddle. Some speculate it was a whaling station with religious overtones, built to serve as both trade post and pilgrimage stop. Others suspect it was a node in a forgotten smuggling route between Novgorod and Denmark, shielded by nature itself. There's even a theory that it was a refuge not for goods, but for people. Outcasts, exiles, the kind who needed a port that kept secrets in frost. You step onto a raised platform, partially thawed by summer sun, and spot a carving in the ice-stained wood. It's a ship not elaborate, but clear. Above it, 3 dots in a triangle. Below, a pair of crossed oars. Similar markings have been found in driftwood carvings as far away as Greenland. The harbor, or what's left of it, ends in a sudden wall of frozen overhang. But behind that curtain of ice lies a small cavern. Eric, your returning guide from Bergen, who happens to moonlight in Arctic folklore, claims it once held a storeroom. You duck inside. It's colder than you expected, and larger. The ceiling vaults upward into what might have been an ice dome, now mostly collapsed. On one side, an iron hook juts from the stone. Hanging from it, nothing. But the shape of what used to hang there is burned into the wall by years of frost exposure. A barrel maybe, or a satchel, or a bell. You sit wrapping your coat tighter and listen. Outside, the wind softens, and for a brief moment the ice does sound like it's breathing slow, low and deep. You close your eyes and picture it, the one night a year. The water cracks open, stars wheel above like a time lapse, and a single lantern is lit, not to guide ships in, but to show them where not to linger. Some harbors welcomed kings, others saints. But what about the ones that opened only for those fleeing everything? Imagine a bay where no one asked your name as long as you came with plague behind you or war in your wake. Let's walk the shore of a place meant for the unwanted. You descend a gentle sea-worn slope toward a quiet crescent of sand tucked between two cliffs far off any major trade route. The wind here is steady but kind. No roads lead in. No ruins remain above ground. But hidden under layers of brush and driftwood lies the whispered legacy of Sanctuary Bay of the Exiled. According to fragmented records and folk tales passed down among coastal farmers, this inlet once served as an unsanctioned landing point for refugees. Not pirates or smugglers, but civilians. Families escaping sieges. Travelers expelled by border laws. Sailors whose ports had turned them away for carrying unclean winds. In short, those who had nowhere else to go. You reach the shoreline and find it surprisingly wide, far too broad for a simple fishing cove. The curve of the bay forms a near-perfect semicircle ideal for shielding moored ships from sudden storms. Though erosion has reshaped much of the terrain, archaeologists have located signs of early wooden pilings, aligned in a staggered pattern just below the tidal line. A single parchment fragment from the late 1300s, preserved in the salt vaults of a nearby abbey, mentions the Hollow of Sanctuary, 3 days south by sail. Welcome to none but the desperate. No location, no name, just that phrase. Historians still argue whether this place operated under tacit religious protection or was simply tolerated as a humanitarian necessity. The church never formally acknowledged it. Monarchs never taxed it. And yet hundreds of graves lie in its vicinity, unmarked, uneven, arranged in lines that curve with the hill as if avoiding something. You wander up from the waterline where the sand turns to gritty loam. Half buried in the soil is a corroded metal ring, likely part of a cargo tether or mooring cleat. A few feet away, a scatter of ceramic shards suggests hasty meals, coarse plates, mismatched bowls, and one tiny glass vial with an intact cork. A local legend claims that the bay once glowed with lanterns every third night, not to guide new arrivals, but to reassure those already ashore. They'd stand in the darkness, watching the light bob and sway across the water, knowing they weren't alone. The makeshift dwellings that once stood here are gone, lost to time and rot. But a few low stone outlines remain barely knee-high now, one with a wide hearth and a sunken threshold likely housed a gathering space, perhaps for prayers, perhaps for stories, perhaps just for silence. You sit on a rock that used to be a doorstep facing the sea. From this angle, the bay seems cradled, shielded not just by cliffs, but by centuries of willful forgetfulness. People came here to disappear, and the land honored that wish. One recovered letter unsigned but dated 1421 reads, "We made landfall under silence. No horn, no welcome, only a single bell left on the sand. I have never been more grateful for nothing." You close your eyes. The wind rustles the grasses with a hush that sounds oddly like breathing. Or maybe that's just the tide. Behind you, the graves lean slightly facing the sea. Ahead, the water waits open, indifferent and endless. What if the wind could sing history back to life? In Normandy, a cluster of worn wooden stumps sits quietly until low tide, and then they start to hum. Why would ancient mooring piles produce music? Are they shaped just right? Or is it the vanished fleet that still lingers in sound? You arrive at a tidal flat off the Cotentin Peninsula, the kind of place where boots are mandatory and time is elastic. At high tide, it's nothing but sea. At low tide, it reveals a world of sun-bleached stones, eelgrass, and most curiously, rows of upright wooden stakes, weathered rotted, yet still standing in neat patterns. Locals call them the chantons, or the singers. You can't find them on most tourist maps, but old naval charts from the 18th century label this area simply as Timberfield. Fishermen avoid anchoring near it, not out of superstition, they insist, but because the place has a way of talking back. At first, it's hard to see the logic in the layout. The posts vary in height, some barely rising from the mud, others still a few feet tall. But when the wind picks up, and it does like clockwork, with the outgoing tide, something strange begins. A sound. Not whistling. Not creaking. A kind of low, hollow harmony like the resonance of tuned glass. The posts vibrate just enough to catch the breeze and transform it into tone. Walk among them, and you hear notes shift as your position changes. A step to the left might deepen the pitch. A step forward might silence it entirely. Acoustic experts have studied the phenomenon. They've determined the mooring posts, hollowed over centuries, act like primitive flutes or panpipes. Some believe it's coincidental, an accident of decay, but others argue the spacing is too deliberate, too symmetrical to be mere chance. Historians still debate whether this sound garden was intentional or a haunting side effect of a well-built fleet infrastructure slowly surrendering to time. Records from the 1200s describe a now-vanished harbor here used for trade troop movement and pilgrim transport. But nothing survives above ground except these stumps. No foundations, no dock remains, just the choir of wood. One 14th century sailor's log mentions a place where the boats remember a poetic phrase, sure, but one that seems oddly literal here. Some even suggest the sounds were once used as signals, a kind of wind-coded communication between harbor crews and incoming vessels. Others scoff, noting there's no evidence of musical intent in medieval port design. Then again, most ports didn't survive by sound alone. You crouch beside one of the taller posts and notice the wear pattern ridges along the grain rubbed smooth in places where ropes likely once tugged. Beneath it, faint grooves in the mud trace the ghost outline of a vessel's hull invisible until the light hits just right. You almost miss it. Then it's all you see. One elderly local claims that the best time to listen is just after the third ebb tide of the month. That's when the ghosts remember their route, she said, unbothered. They'll sing it if you're polite. You stay until dusk. The light softens, and the wind steadies into something almost melodic. You walk between the posts, like they're pews in a chapel, quiet, reverent, tuned to a hymn no one wrote, but everyone recognizes. You pause, close your eyes, and the sound grows clearer, not louder, but more layered. Tones within tones. It's easy to imagine sails flapping men, shouting in dialects, long dead, the scrape of hull against shore. All gone now, except for the song. Some piers were built to welcome cargo, others to welcome kings. But what if one was built to vanish? In Portugal, there's a stone dock tied to Templars, treasure voyages and routes that don't appear on maps. Who built it, what left from it, and why was it hidden for centuries? You arrive at a rocky coast in central Portugal, just beyond the last tourist-friendly vineyard, and well before the cliffs start to look truly inhospitable. The landscape narrows into a cove shaped like a bent key, and there, mostly obscured by overgrowth and salt-heavy air, lies a short pier made of massive stone blocks, weathered precise and not quite like the ones nearby. The locals call it O Cais Velado, the Veiled Key. Its exact origin is unknown. Some say it dates to the 12th century, Others argue for early 14th. But its real mystery isn't how old it is, it's what it was used for. Unlike most medieval docks, this one faces away from natural trade routes. It's not near any major town, and most tellingly, it doesn't connect to any inland road, just a narrow footpath that vanishes into scrub. Templar documents, at least the fragments not destroyed or lost, make occasional mention of a southern slip used for special cargoes. One even contains the phrase, "From the hidden mouth sails, what must not be traced." What that meant exactly remains debated. Treasure relics. Or perhaps people you walk the length of the dock. It's short, barely long enough to moor a vessel larger than a river barge. But the craftsmanship is unmistakable. Chiseled interlocking stones, fitted without mortar, smoothed at the edges from centuries of tide. The base of the pier holds small rectangular insets, too regular to be random, likely used for securing something. Crates, chains, ritual posts. Historians still argue whether the site served practical shipping or symbolic departure. One theory suggests it was a launch point for treasure-laden ships heading west during the suppression of the Templars' vessels that never returned, fueling countless pirate legends and even a few speculative novels. Another theory posits that the dock was used for spiritual retreats, a place where Templars could depart on secret pilgrimages or initiate rites away from public scrutiny. Supporting this, a barely legible carving on one side of the stone base, a circle enclosing a cross and a star. Not quite standard Templar iconography, but close enough to raise eyebrows. You kneel beside the marking, running your hand over the grooves. They're deep weathered, but deliberate. Not graffiti, not decorative. More like a signpost for someone who already knew where they were going. A local shepherd told you earlier that animals won't drink near the dock, not because of anything sinister, but because the ground remembers whatever that means. He also claimed his grandfather once found a ring of scorched earth near the path, perfectly circular, gone by morning. You walk to the end of the pier and sit watching the tide crawl forward like a polite secret. There are no buildings nearby, no ruins of warehouses or customs posts, just this one slab of engineered silence reaching into the Atlantic. The sun dips low. The water turns to molten pewter. You half expect to see a lantern swing into view, hanging from nothing, guiding no one. But nothing comes. Only the hush. Most ports welcome the living. But what if there was one that existed only for the dead? In northern Spain, a riverside landing once served as the final passage, not for cargo, not for pilgrims, but for coffins. Tonight we arrive at the solemn, silty remains of the cathedral port of the dead. You find the inlet after a winding detour through Galicia's forested hills where the air tastes of eucalyptus and moss. There's a hush to the place, not silence exactly, but something slower, like even the birds are speaking softer. The river here is wide and flat, the kind that glides instead of gurgles. This quiet waterway, once called Puerto del Silencio, was the entry point for funeral barges bound for a now-buried cathedral town nearby. Records from the 13th and 14th centuries describe a solemn procession of boats ferrying the bodies of nobles, clerics, and even pilgrims who died en route to Santiago de Compostela. The tradition known locally as La Travesía Muda, the silent crossing, lasted for over 200 years. You walk toward the shore, where grass gives way to uneven stones. A low retaining wall juts from the bank at a gentle angle, moss-covered and cracked. Near its base, two large stone rings are embedded in the ground, likely used for tying vessels. But what's most striking is the set of carved grooves running parallel to the waterline like tracks for a wheeled cart. Or a litter. You crouch beside them. The grooves are worn smooth in the center, but at the edges, you can still see faint cross-hatching, likely meant to grip the feet of pallbearers or steady a bier. Further uphill, past a row of gnarled cypress trees, lie the remains of a chapel. Just the foundation, stones a broken font, and a single carved bench still facing the water. Historians still argue whether the port was a religious innovation or a practical workaround. Moving bodies by boat was faster and less taxing than carting them through mountain roads. But many believe the ritual had deeper roots. Some accounts speak of candles being lit at dusk and placed in hollow gourds, then floated alongside the barge as it approached. Others mention bells tied to the prow, low single-toned instruments that marked the boat's presence long before it came into view. A 15th century monk recorded in his journal, "They come not with oars, but with memory. The water parts out of reverence." Whether poetic or literal, it's hard not to feel the gravity of this place. You step onto what little remains of the dock, mostly rotted beams, held in place by stubborn lichen. But one plank still bears a carved inscription, a Latin phrase partially obscured but readable enough in pace maris transit anima. In the peace of the sea, the soul crosses. Nearby, a stone arch once framed the entry to the chapel. Now, it frames sky. A stork nests atop one pillar. Beneath it, someone has left a small offering, dried herbs, a coin, and a scrap of paper too damp to read. You sit on the carved bench and watch the water. A long, slow ripple curls across the surface, though there's no wind and no boat. You could call it a fish. You could call it nothing. But for a brief moment, it moves like memory. Not toward you, but away. A jetty with no attached town. No roads, no ruins, no clear reason to exist, except it does. Why would someone build a perfectly preserved stone pier that leads to nowhere, off a rocky Irish coast? Who used it, and what were they walking toward? Let's follow the line. To the end. You arrive by foot, following a sheep path barely carved into the heather. The landscape around you is all uneven stone and misty air, the kind that makes you question distance. But then it appears sudden confident, out of sync with its surroundings. A stone jetty solid and straight, projecting out into the Atlantic like punctuation. Locals call it the jetty to nowhere. It's been there for centuries, yet oddly enough, almost no one seems to talk about it. Not because it's forbidden, but because it's unexplained. The nearby hamlet is tiny modern and has no historical link to seafaring or trade. No ancient fishing village, no evidence of a fort or estate. Just this jetty clean and symmetrical, leading out into water too deep for wading and too exposed for safe docking. You step onto the stones. They're cut cleanly set tight, clearly the work of skilled masons. A narrow lip runs along either edge, possibly for foot traffic or for railings that no longer exist. The tide slaps gently below calm today, but clearly capable of force. And still, the jetty holds. Historians still argue whether it was ever connected to anything at all. There's no trace of a matching harbor warehouse or cliff path. Some think it was a practice dock, an architectural experiment. Others suggest it was built to serve a structure that's long vanished, like a pilgrimage hospice or a temporary trading outpost during a short-lived era of transatlantic contact. A few scholars, the bolder ones, propose that it was ceremonial, that people once walked its length not to board ships, but to leave something behind, a rite of release perhaps, or a symbolic casting off. You reach the end. The water here drops off sharply. No reef, no sandbar, just depth and sea. On the final stone slab, barely visible, are three carved lines that resemble tally marks. They don't spell anything. They don't point, but they feel deliberate. One fisherman once told a visiting researcher, "That pier's not broken. It's finished." There's a difference. He never explained what he meant. You sit at the edge legs dangling over and watch the horizon blur with the sky. The Atlantic rolls out without boundary. The wind brushes your collar. For a moment you try to imagine the jetty's purpose. Was it hope? Was it exile? Was it just habit? Then something strange happens. A small swell lifts from the water and passes beneath you. Not odd, except that for a moment, the entire structure beneath you hums just faintly, like stone adjusting itself. Could be your imagination. Could be a trick of tide and shape. But it feels aligned. You stay a little longer until the sky pinks at the edges and the first cold stars peek through the mist. Then slowly, you rise. Turn back. Walk the length of the jetty again this time, not looking down, but forward. Not toward a harbor, not toward a path. Just the land. Quiet. Waiting. You're bundled in layers that aren't quite enough, trudging across pebbled sand boots, sinking with every step. There's a shipwreck memorial just ahead, bent iron bleached wood, and a small bronze plaque so worn you can barely read the date. Just offshore waves hiss around jagged black rocks, and beyond them stands the lighthouse. It's stoic, hollow-eyed, and far too quiet. The story they tell here is simple and wrong. That a storm came, the light failed, and a freighter was dashed apart on the reef. But then, of course, there's the other story. The one murmured by old men at the inn after too many pints. They say the lighthouse blinked off on purpose. Just for a few moments, just long enough. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trace your fingers along that plaque, barely more than a name and a year. The sky above rolls gray and heavy, not stormy exactly, but close enough to remember. No one knows who lit the beacon that night. The official keeper was ashore sick with fever, and his assistant swore he never left his bunk. But the logs show the lamp was lit, and then off. Not out like a flame dying, but off like someone flipped a switch. Which in 1884 was a curious idea. The lamp was oil-fueled and needed tending every 30 minutes. So how could it vanish so cleanly so suddenly? The only witness was a boy on the beach gathering driftwood. He says he saw the beam dance once, hesitate, and then die, just before the sky cracked open with wind. He ran for the village shouting, but by then it was already too late. 17 men aboard the Adelaide never made it to shore. Historians still argue whether the assistant could have snuck up in time to relight it. Some say sabotage, others a gust so precise it shattered the lens. But you walk up that same trail tonight, past wild rosemary and sea-pitted stones, and nothing feels accidental. The tower door is ajar, has been since the 1950s. Inside, the air is salt damp and sour. A single boot lies by the stairs, and up in the lantern room, there's still soot on the glass. Just one pane, one small square where the light refused to shine. You lean close. Through the dusty lens, the sea looks calm enough. But there, did you see it? A flicker. Not from your torch. From inside the lens. It's gone now, of course. But you don't look again. Instead, you take a deep breath. You're here for the story, not to join it. A lighthouse high above the tide, a journal tucked beneath the floorboards, and initials no one can trace. What do you do with a diary that remembers a keeper history forgot? You don't plan to go upstairs. Not tonight. Not with the wind picking up again. The same wind that threw the Adelaide against the reef. But you glance at the spiral staircase and feel the quiet nudge of curiosity. Just a peek, you tell yourself. The metal groans under your weight, too much sea air and too many winters. Still, step by careful step, you rise. Halfway up, you pass a brass plaque tarnished beyond legibility. Maybe a dedication, maybe a warning. The staircase narrows. You duck under a low beam and find yourself in the keeper's quarters. The room is bare. A cot, a stove, a writing desk whose drawer has swelled shut. But beneath a loose floorboard, no nails, just warped wood. Your fingers find leather, thin, cracked, and held together by a belt that isn't yours. It's a journal, and it's full. The first page is dated 1891. You flip through entries, neat and clipped. Weather notes, oil levels, times the lens was cleaned. All signed J.R.W. No full name, no title. But you know the records. You read them back in the archive office, thumbing through microfiche while someone's microwave beeped in the next room. In 1891, the lighthouse had no assigned keeper. The station was closed, officially mothballed until repairs could be made. So who was writing these notes, and why was he so calm? One entry reads, "He walked the tide line again tonight. Still no footprints." Another lit west lamp. He asked for it. And then, in the margin, who writes, "When I sleep." You check the binding. No pages added. The ink matches throughout. But the handwriting, yes. Here and there, it shifts. Just enough. Historians still argue whether J.R.W. was real or a bored clerk's fiction. Some suggest a drifter holed up for the winter. Others, a caretaker whose name was scrubbed from the registry for reasons unknown. But then you get to the last entry, dated 2 weeks before the lighthouse reopened under official care. Left the door open. He said it was polite. No signature, just that. You close the journal slowly, like it might blink if you move too fast. You can feel it now, that creeping sensation. Not fear, not exactly. Just a sense that the air here remembers too much. That the salt in the walls holds more than moisture. You slip the journal back into its hiding place. You're not here to steal stories, just borrow them for a while. The cot creaks as you sit. You imagine J.R.W., whoever he was scratching, lines into the book by lantern glow. Listening to the foghorn echo off empty waves. Maybe hearing something else too. Something no one ever confirmed. That's the thing about records. They're not truth. Just tidied memories. And sometimes the untidy ones are what linger. You head back down the spiral stairs, not looking over your shoulder. Not because you're brave, but because you've read enough stories to know whatever's behind you only follows if you give it attention. Outside, the wind has changed. Blowing east now, like it remembers a different night. The journal stays where it is, but you'll think about those entries, especially the one that reads, "He returned." They say the lamp never went out, but all that's left is a blackened shell, melted brass, and the smell of soot that shouldn't be there. If there was no fire, what turned the metal to ash? The path to the next lighthouse is rougher. Less a trail than a suggestion of one winding through shrubs that leave salt-powdered scratches across your sleeves. The air here tastes burnt, not of wood, but of old metal-scorched glass and something you can't name. Locals call this tower the ash room. Not for mushrooms, though the stone is spattered with lichen, but because of what they found inside, or, more precisely, what they didn't. You stand at the threshold where a door once hung. It's long gone now, reduced to a rusted bracket and a splintered hinge. You step inside. Immediately, the floor creaks underfoot charred boards that never burned. This lighthouse hasn't been in use for decades. The records say it was struck by lightning once in the spring of 1926, but sustained no serious damage. Still, the lamp room top of the spiral heart of the light is sealed. Or was. Someone's opened it again. Someone curious, maybe. Someone like you. The climb is slower this time. A chill snakes down the center of the stairwell, though the air outside is almost warm. You pass walls lined with peeling paint, a once bright green faded to algae gray. At the top, a thick metal hatch yawns wide, and inside, black. Not darkness. Black. The soot here is strange, clinging gritty, but without scent. The lantern at the center of the room is twisted, its housing warped like soft wax. The brass casing has collapsed inward, as though melted. But no signs of flame. No scorching on the walls. No shattered glass. Just the lantern itself, warped and frozen in an impossible pose. You reach out and touch the metal cool, almost damp. Around the base, you notice something stranger. A ring of dustless floor. Perfectly clean where the soot never settled. You kneel. Something shimmers faintly at the edge of the circle. Not light exactly. More like displacement. Like heat ripples but without warmth. You blink. It's gone. Historians still argue whether the 1926 lightning strike even happened. The lighthouse logbook makes no mention of it, though several sailors swore they saw a bolt connect with the tower's tip. One described the light as turning inside out. Engineers examined the remains years later and declared it impossible. The lamp's brass housing doesn't melt at natural temperatures, and certainly not without burning the surrounding timber. But here it is, twisted like wax left on a radiator. You don't stay long. The room feels unfinished, like something still lingers just out of view. As you descend, you notice small handprints on the railing. Not childish, just unusually narrow. Each print is black with soot, except one half-formed, like the hand stopped halfway through existing. The steps echo louder than before, as if the stairwell grew deeper behind you. Outside, you brush off your coat. The wind carries no scent now. But the tips of your fingers feel warm, despite the cold. And as you walk away, you glance back once, not at the tower, but at its topmost window. There's no one there. But the soot on the glass has been smudged just enough to see out. Just enough to see in. An old sea chart, a mismarked beacon, and wrecks in the wrong place. Why would a lighthouse shine where it shouldn't? And why do sailors say it seemed to call them closer? The harbor town isn't on most maps. You only find it because a bus driver nodded vaguely inland and said, "Might be what you're after." You step off on a gravel shoulder where the sea is more rumor than reality, just a saltier breeze and the occasional gull. It's the kind of place where everyone has the same last name, where the diner's menu hasn't changed since the 1950s, and where folks don't talk about the lighthouse unless you're buying the second round. That's how you meet Tom. Silver-haired, amber-eyed, and possibly part kelp. He's been sailing longer than you've been alive, and he's got one story, just one. But it's enough. It wasn't warning us, he says, nursing a chipped mug of something strong and bitter. It wanted us. You raise an eyebrow. Wait for the wink, the chuckle, the just messing with you. It never comes. He tells you about the Hesperus, a freighter too small for deep sea and too proud for coastal that ran aground in 1973. Calm waters, no fog, crew sober, competent, well-fed, no distress signal, no mayday, just silence, followed by the sound of metal tearing open on reef. And the light, yes, the lighthouse was functioning. That's the twist. Fully lit, fully staffed, and clearly visible. Too visible. They say it shone from a point due west of the actual tower. That it gleamed right at eye level, low across the water, almost like it was on a ship itself. Some described it as steady. Others said it blinked in rhythm with the tide. Coast Guard records claim poor navigation, misread maps. But Tom's father was first mate on the Hesperus. He knew the coast like his own back pocket. He'd never mistake land for sea. When they reached the wreck, what was left of it, the lighthouse crew swore the beacon had remained in place. Stationary, standard pattern, recorded cleanly, except for one thing: the backup bulb was missing. Not blown, not broken. Gone. No one ever found it. Historians still debate whether some freak reflection could explain the light's displacement. Others suspect sabotage, someone shining a decoy from a trawler. But there's one photo taken accidentally by a beachcomber the next morning. It shows the tower in the distance, and something else, a faint glimmer, just above the waterline, hovering in a place where no boat should be. You ask Tom why he still lives here. Why he stays if the light wants people close. He laughs without humor. Maybe it wants company, he says. Maybe it gets lonely. You hike the cliffs the next morning, just to look. The lighthouse is unremarkable, weather-stained stone, faded red cap, the usual spiral stairs. Nothing sinister, nothing magical, until dusk. That's when the beam begins to sweep. You trace its arc with your eyes and pause. For just a moment, the light seems to bend. Not around corners, not in physics-breaking ways, just off. A single angle where the beam stutters and narrows like squeezing through something invisible. You blink. It's fine again. But you look down and see nestled in the rocks a tiny sliver of glass. Curved. Thick. Clearly manufactured. You pocket it. Later back in town, you hold it up to the window. The world tilts slightly through it. Only slightly. But the light doesn't pass through at all. It's absorbed. And when you finally let your hand drop, the glass feels warmer than it should. What do you do with a fog that doesn't lift? Not at noon. Not in summer. Not when every surrounding cliff is basking in sunlight. One headland in Brittany hides beneath a shroud no wind can break. And it's been this way for centuries. You don't plan to visit Brittany, but weather has other ideas. A canceled ferry, a wrong bus, and suddenly you're hiking toward a place not even the locals seem to claim. The map marks it as Pointe de la Brume Mist Point. No town nearby. Just a scribbled spiral where the land juts into the Atlantic like a chipped tooth. As you approach, the fog starts at your ankles. It's not thick, not at first. Just a soft silver smear over the heather, like a dream that hasn't fully cleared. You walk another 20 minutes and realize it's climbing, not burning off, but building. By the time you reach the lighthouse, visibility is down to 3 steps in any direction. You blink often, hoping your eyes will adjust, but it's not your vision. It's the air itself, thicker than fog, should be almost textured. The lighthouse emerges like a ghost whitewashed stone streaked with algae, its red lantern dome barely visible through the gloom. You half expect to find a keeper leaning on the rail, polishing the lens. But it's empty. Has been for decades. And yet the lamp glows faintly. Not the full sweep of an active beacon, but a soft, steady pulse, like a heartbeat. No electric hum, no rotating parts, just light always the same. You step inside. The logs are still there, preserved in plastic sleeves. Dates run back to 1842, the last entry written in a script so careful it must have taken hours. It reads, "Clear everywhere. Still mist here. No wind. No change." You page through older entries. Same pattern. Same observation. Every few weeks, a note fog persists. Lighthouse above cloud line. Then later, sunset over clear horizon. Fog remained. You check modern satellite photos. On clear days, the surrounding coastline is bright and visible. This headland always blurred. Historians still argue if the fog has some microclimatic cause. A unique blend of currents and cliff geometry, maybe. But no instruments can explain why it doesn't drift thin or swirl. It holds. You step into the lamp room. The air is warmer here, but still damp. The lens itself is dusty, but the light inside, if there is a source, shines without flicker, without change. You touch the brass railing. It hums slightly, like it's remembering something. A single note has been taped to the interior panel. Do not adjust lens. No signature. No date. Just that. You back away. The fog outside hasn't moved, hasn't thinned, but inside your coat pocket, your phone pings. You've just received a photo. No caption, no sender. It shows the lighthouse, your lighthouse, taken from above. But you haven't seen the sky in hours. A tower that once guarded the edge of a cliff now stands deep inland. No earthquakes, no erosion, no relocation project. So how did a whole lighthouse shift half a mile from the sea with no one watching? You don't plan to stay long in the village of Carent. It's a quiet inland settlement, mostly sheep and stone chimneys, with a single road that loops in on itself like a lazy river. But when you mention you're looking into lighthouse records, a grocer pauses mid-sail and says, "Oh, you mean the one that moved." Moved. You blink, thinking they mean dismantled, relocated, maybe preserved in a museum park somewhere. But no, they mean moved, shifted. The way you describe a chair that now blocks a doorway. Not rebuilt, not copied, just not where it was. You follow their directions past 2 stone walls and a sagging gate and find it. There, in a hollow surrounded by hedgerows, is the lighthouse, intact. Weather-worn, slightly tilted, but clearly complete. Only problem, the sea is half a mile away. It's not even visible from here. The land between is mostly fields and cow paths, a few scattered pines, certainly no cliff. The lighthouse itself is sealed. Heavy boards nailed across the doorway windows, bricked in decades ago. But the tower's original registration plate remains screwed into its base, corroded but legible. It matches photos from coastal archives, which all place the structure directly on the headland. You hike there next, to the old cliff. And sure enough, the base is still there. Stone foundation, metal rods, half a staircase clinging like barnacles to the rock. It's clearly the same make, same dimensions, same pattern of cracks, but no tower. Historians still argue whether this was a clerical mix-up, 2 identical towers swapped in records. Some suggest an elaborate prank, though no machinery tracks or relocation permits were ever filed. And the villagers, they're non-committal. It was always there, one says, with a shrug. But it used to be over there, he adds, pointing vaguely toward the coast. You ask how long ago the shift happened. He frowns. Was it after the cows vanished, or before? No one's sure. Back at the inland site, you notice something odd. The tower's compass orientation is wrong. The lantern room faces northwest away from where the sea would have been, but in archival photos it faced true east. You circle the tower. Embedded near the base is a bent weather vane twisted like something spun it fast and let go. You peer into a chink in the brick. It's dark inside, but your flashlight catches a glint glass and something painted, a mural, unfinished, half buried in shadow. You adjust your beam. It's a coastline, stylized rocky, and at the edge, a tower. Not this one taller, with windows all the way up. Above it hovers something oval reflective, too large to be a star. You lower the flashlight, step back. The mural doesn't match any known feature in the region. You reach out just to steady yourself, but your fingers don't touch brick. They touch air, cold, heavy, like pressing against running water. You blink. The feeling passes. But now your compass app refuses to load. And when you check your map, the lighthouse is missing. Again. The lighthouse has been empty for years, but the stairs still creak at night. Not with the usual size of old timber, but with deliberate steps, heavy and slow. If no one's there, who or what is climbing? You're not usually one for ghost stories. You've sat in enough drafty towers to know that old buildings make odd sounds. Wood expands, metal moans, wind whistles like it's lost something. But this lighthouse, this one, is different. Locals call it the Stepper. They say it's been silent by day for decades, locked, inspected, declared safe. But once night falls, the stairs come alive. You're handed the key with a nervous glance and a thermos of tea you didn't ask for. Just stay awake, they say, or don't. Either way, it walks. You shrug it off until midnight, when the temperature dips enough to sting your fingertips even indoors. The wind has died completely. No rattle in the windows. No rustling grass. Just silence. Then a sound. Step. Not a creak, not a groan. A step. Deliberate. Weighted. From above. You freeze. Your breath catches, condenses, vanishes. Another. Step. You check the entryway. Still bolted. You've locked yourself inside, intentionally, of course. But the tension in your jaw now reminds you that even brave choices have costs. You decide to listen. No flashlight. No recordings. Just your breath. The cold. And that sound. Step. Closer now. You press your ear to the stone wall. It's warm. A deep, faint hum echoes through it like a wire under strain. The steps aren't random. They pause every 14 seconds like a mechanical rhythm or a ritual. Historians still argue if the tower once housed machinery on the upper floors, some early automation system abandoned in the 1930s. But no blueprint shows such equipment, and certainly nothing that should be moving now. You climb slowly, flashlight off feet, silent on the ancient spiral. Halfway up, you stop. The air feels thinner. There's no light from above, but the steps continue. You don't turn the final bend. Something inside you says the top landing isn't for you. You descend instead, quietly backwards. As you reach the bottom, a final step lands just overhead. Then silence. You wait. Long minutes. The floor doesn't creak again. The walls no longer hum. But the smell fresh oil, just a trace. As if the lamp had been tended. You leave at dawn. The keeper's log from the 1890s sits open on the desk. You swear it was closed when you arrived. One new line dated in pencil. Stairs walked. Light trimmed. No reply below. You hear them in the radio room. Final log entries from vessels that should have made it safely to port. Saw the blinking eye, they say. Then nothing. No follow-ups. No coordinates. Just silence that stretches across the sea like a held breath. You visit the old radio operator at the edge of town. He lives in a shack with peeling green paint and an antenna taller than his roof, surrounded by wires that hum in the breeze like distant music. He's wiry, bright-eyed, and already pouring tea by the time you reach the door. Thought you'd come about the eye, he says, as if it's the most natural thing in the world. He takes you inside. The place smells of warm dust and solder. Shelves sag with signal equipment, older than some lighthouses you visited. But the crown jewel is his tape library, hundreds of reels meticulously labeled, stored like sacred scrolls. He pulls one down. Mid-November 1961. Coastal freighter Caroline's Echo. Weather fair. No radar anomalies. Crew confirmed as experienced. This, he pats the reel, was their last transmission. He threads the tape flick switches weights. Static crackles. Then a voice clipped urgent, too clear for its age. Saw it again. The blinking eye. Off port bow. Looks wrong. Light. A pause. A faint beep. Nothing more. He plays another. June 1978. Pleasure yacht. Clear skies. Passing lighthouse now. Lights. Pulsing. Thought it was supposed to rotate. Then silence. No further contact. No recovery. You ask how many he has. He points to a red cabinet. That's just the eye shelf, he says. Got another for Bell. One for West Lamp. And the old tapes, they don't like to be near each other. He's not joking. Historians still argue if these disappearances were simple misfortunes, rogue waves, mechanical failure, but the timing, always within minutes of describing an unusual light, has drawn plenty of quiet attention. He lets you copy one of the tapes. For the record, he says. You're not sure what record he means. That night, you stay in a coastal hostel with weak walls and a better view of the horizon than you'd prefer. The tape plays softly beside you. You keep the volume low. The voice describes the blinking light again. Calm, focused, until the end. A new voice fades in. Not a crew member. Not the operator. A whisper. Barely audible. You replay it 4 times. Finally, you catch 3 words. You saw it. There's no bell tower. Never was. Yet fishermen swear they hear it every dusk, low clear, and always just before the fog rolls in. So where does the bell come from? And why does it toll only for those still at sea? You arrive in a harbor town so small it doesn't even have a sign. Just a hand-painted arrow on a post that leans slightly toward the water. The tide's out, and the rocks glisten like wet ink beneath the pale sky. You follow the shore until you spot the lighthouse. It's stumpy, more squat than stately, with peeling white paint and a long decommissioned lantern cage. The glass has been removed. No rotating light, no working foghorn, and definitely no bell. You're certain of this. You circle the structure twice. The only noise is the flap of gulls and the gentle lap of waves. And then just before dusk, the sound comes. Clear, deliberate, a bell. One low toll followed by 3 short chimes. It's not coming from the tower. It's coming from above the sea. You scramble onto a rock outcrop, heart thudding, not with fear, but with confusion. The sky is empty. No ships, no buoys, nothing that could ring. And yet the sound rolls on. Measured, rhythmic, then gone. Back in town, the fishermen aren't surprised. Oh, you heard the bell, one says, like you'd mentioned spotting a stray cat. Always rings before the fog, doesn't it? You ask about a source. They shake their heads. There's no bell tower, you insist. Nope, another agrees. Never was. You mention the chime pattern. He nods. 3 short, 1 long. That's the old call for return. Used to mean get back to harbor before the weather turned. Funny thing is, he pauses, adjusting his cap. Nobody alive remembers who taught us that. Historians still suggest the bell might have once existed offshore, perhaps a buoy or ship fixture, long lost. But no nautical maps show such equipment ever stationed here. The seabed was scanned during harbor development in the 80s. Nothing. The lighthouse logs from the 1930s contain scattered mentions Bell heard again. No fog today. Or more oddly, Bell stopped mid-chime. One entry ends with Bell tolled from inside. You return the next evening. This time you bring recording gear. The bell tolls again, 4 chimes, different pattern. You capture the sound. Later in a studio, you isolate the tones. Hidden behind them, barely there, a second noise emerges. Like breath, caught between metal and mist. Not quite words, but close. You play it backward. A shape forms in the waveform, not sound. A pattern. A lighthouse silhouette. One that doesn't match any tower you've seen. And behind the silhouette, a bell, hung from air, ringing in fog that hasn't yet arrived. Every night a light appears in the old island tower. It burns at the same hour, even during storms. But the oil tank's been dry for decades, and the keeper who lit it passed long ago. So what keeps the lantern glowing, and for whom you reach the island by ferry barely? The schedule is erratic, and the captain only agrees to make the crossing after a long pause and a glance at the clouds. No rain, he mutters, as if the boat minds more than he does. The island itself is little more than a rocky dome tufted with grass and gorse. A single path winds up to the tower, which stands alone like a spine left behind by some long-vanished creature. You find the door unlocked. The floorboards creak, but they're solid. Dust lies thick on every surface, except the stairs. They're swept clean. Not just scuffed, by curious feet, swept, as if someone tends them regularly. You climb slowly. The lantern room is intact, though its window panes are mottled with salt. The lamp itself stands in the center brass body glass chamber, and an empty fuel line that ends in a rusted nozzle. It should not work, but it does. Every night, exactly 20 minutes past sundown, the lantern glows. Not flickers. Glows. Steady, warm golden. And it stays lit for 1 hour and 13 minutes. Every time. You ask the island's caretaker, a mainlander, who visits twice a month to check structural integrity. He shrugs. Yeah. We tried replacing the whole fixture once. Lights stopped for 3 nights. Then came back on in the old one. Nobody's touched it since. The archives hold letters from the tower's last keeper dating back to the 1920s. He wrote often of his son lost at sea. Not drowned lost. The boy's ship disappeared en route to Greenland. No debris. No signal. No return. After that, the keeper recorded a strange pattern in his logs. Light requested, always at 2023. Later entries grew more cryptic. He needs it to find the way back. And finally, I won't let it go dark. Not until he's home. He passed in 1942, but the light kept burning. Historians still debate whether the lamp's consistency could be a rare solar effect. Others suspect a quirk of reflective materials still embedded in the structure. But tests show no known power source, no functioning battery, nothing to explain the glow. The lens housing is sealed. You try to open it. It doesn't resist. It simply won't move, as if something beneath holds it still. You return to the beach at sunset. The lamp is already glowing, just as the ferry rounds the bend and disappears. You watch as the light flares slightly, just for a moment, then settles again. On the wind, you think you hear gulls, but there are no birds, just waves, and a lamp that waits for someone who hasn't come home. They decommission the lighthouse, strip the bulbs, remove the keepers, and lock the doors. But sailors still wave back at the woman in the window, dressed in white, arm raised in slow, steady farewell. So who or what is left behind in the glass? Automated in 1991, the Greystone Beacon hasn't had a human resident for over 3 decades. The tower now runs on solar panels. A low-efficiency, high-durability light pulses every 12 seconds enough to meet regulations, not enough to attract attention. The structure itself is weather-beaten, but stable. The visitor center next door remains shuttered. Too expensive to maintain, too remote to attract tourists. You arrive on a fogless afternoon. The sea is quiet, the gulls unusually silent. There's no one else around. You walk the cliff path and pause below the tower, gazing up at the top floor. The glass glints. You see her, briefly. A woman in white linen or cotton, maybe a smock, standing at the center window, one arm raised. Still, you don't blink, but the figure vanishes all the same. At the Maritime cafe near the port, you ask the old captain behind the counter. He doesn't hesitate. She's still waving. You nod. He just hums and pours coffee. Saw her when I was a boy. First time I crossed to Dockland. I waved back. Felt rude not to. Historians still log the reports. Over 200 documented sightings, none from the land. Only from boats. Always from sea-facing angles. Never from the cliff. You return the next morning, set up a camera. Motion-triggered high-res pointed at the top floor. It records 36 hours. No movement, no figure, no anomalies. Then you try something different. You bring a small fishing boat row out half a kilometer, turn back. She's there. The same white figure. Still arm raised. No movement. But the air shifts subtly, as if it remembers applause. The boat rocks once hard, though the sea is flat. Your camera on shore reviewed later records, only clear glass. No figure. But the boat's log, your voice recorded, idly catches you murmuring, "Got your wave." You don't remember saying it. And yet, listening closely, there's another sound, layered faintly beneath your voice. Fabric. Moving. Like someone adjusting her sleeve. Every sailor knows the tides. When they rise, when they fall, when they pull hardest. But on one coast, the ocean sometimes turns back, just for a moment, whenever the lighthouse glows red. What kind of signal reverses water? You travel east, to a shoreline. Few swimmers, brave and fewer, still study. The sea here isn't unkind, it's just moody. Quick to shift quicker, to churn off and still, as glass without warning. Locals don't name it. They just nod toward it, like someone they'd rather not introduce. The lighthouse atop the bluff is old, but still in use. Manned part-time by a retired maritime engineer who speaks sparingly and wears 3 scarves regardless of weather. He lets you in after a brief glance and a muttered, "Watch the switch." The main lamp is modern. Swivels smooth powers cleanly. But next to it, tucked behind a louvered panel, is a smaller bulb. Red, dusty, unused. Mostly. You ask about it. Auxiliary, he says. Installed back in the 40s. Almost never engaged. Almost, he doesn't elaborate. So you ask the harbor master. That's when you hear the stories. Every so often, always at night, always without forecast, the tide turns. Not slows. Reverses. Just for a few minutes. Not every vessel notices. But the long-haul trawlers feel it nets, slackening anchors, shifting hulls, twitching gently backward. And every time it happens, someone swears they saw the red light. Not a full sweep, just a flash. Low to the horizon, like a blink. Historians still struggle to find a cause. No seismic events, no dam-related fluctuations. And yet the logs, handwritten and digital alike, mark these reversals with uncanny consistency. You're shown one dated June 11th, 1989. Tide pulled west for 4 men 17s. Red lamp scene. No operator present. You ask if it's been tested. "Oh, sure," says the engineer. "Switched it on once just to see." And two boys collided head-on. Tether lines pulled taut against the current. One anchor lifted itself right off the seabed. You stare at the switch. It looks ordinary. You don't touch it. But that night, while watching from the beach, you see the glow. One pulse. Deep crimson. The ocean stills, then flows backward soft and quiet as breath. And beside you in the sand, your compass spins, once, then stops. There's a door at the base of the lighthouse. No handle. No lock. No hinges. Just a seamless panel sealed into stone. Everyone avoids it. No one remembers why. But the records say it wasn't always shut, and someone signed the log the night it closed. The lighthouse isn't marked on your official map. It appears only on an older one, the kind printed in a long-defunct style, with curled edges and a watermark from a now-defunct Maritime trust. A red X marks the promontory with one word beneath it, Weldgate. You find it after a half-day's hike through thick brambles and shoulder-high grass. The tower stands weather-worn but steady, shadowed by a copse of leaning firs. The door, if you can call it that, is clearly visible from the path. A perfect rectangle carved into the base of the stone, maybe 6 feet tall, but it's flush with the wall. No seams, no frame, no way to open it. You press your palm against it. Cold, smooth. It doesn't give. Inside the lighthouse is ordinary dusty, echoing the steps, as drafty as expected. You find an old logbook on the second-floor spine, cracked pages yellowed but legible. Most entries are standard weather reports, shipping observations, lamp maintenance. But one page, dated October 3rd, 1934, stands out. Close the door today, as agreed. No protests, no noise, all quiet. There are no entries after that. You flip back. The previous week's entries mention lower roomwork subfloor evaluation, and once door needed soon. No mention of what's beneath. Historians still debate the function of the base door. Some claim it was a storage access, sealed during renovations. But the concrete surrounding it is uniform, no sign of repair, no evidence of patchwork. You ask a preservation expert who visited the site in the 70s. She pauses. "I never saw the door," she says slowly. "But I remember feeling like I'd passed one." You describe it. She nods faintly, unsettled. "The night after our visit, she adds the compass on my dashboard spun every time I drove near the coast. You return the next morning with ground-penetrating radar. The machine flickers, glitches, then picks up a cavity behind the sealed wall. A perfect rectangular hollow extending 12 feet inward. No stairs, no corridor, just a space. You leave a small recorder in front of the door. Nothing fancy, just a loop of ambient sound. You return hours later, retrieve it, and press play. Mostly wind. Some gulls, and then faintly, knock knock. Twice. No wind at that moment. You check the timestamp. Same hour the 1934 log says the door was sealed. And in the last few seconds of the recording, there's a hum. Low. Mechanical. Or not. Margins filled with odd little notes. He returned. Don't light the west lamp. It watches. No context. No initials. Just fragments scattered through decades of weather logs, always in the same handwriting. But none of the keepers claim to have written them. You're deep in the archives now. Dusty stacks beneath a maritime museum that smells of mildew and old canvas. You've been flipping through weather logs, innocuous volumes, filled with barometric pressure wave height cloud coverage for nearly 3 hours. Most of them are exactly what you'd expect. Dry, repetitive, occasionally smudged with coffee or ink. Then you find the first margin note. It scrawled sideways next to a wind speed table. He returned. Stayed longer this time. You pause. The log is dated 1952, signed by Keeper J. Barrage, but the handwriting in the margin doesn't match the keeper's bold looping script. It's smaller, neater, written with a finer pen. You pull the next log from the same tower, December through February. Nothing unusual. But in the third week of January, another note. West lamp flickered. He noticed. There is no west lamp. You check the diagrams. That lighthouse has only one lamp mounted centrally. No auxiliary systems. Nothing marked west. You flip back again. In the October entries, there's a scribbled line squeezed between rows. Don't light the west lamp. Not after dusk. You go hunting. Across 7 more volumes from 1947 to 1968, the same handwriting appears. Never in the main entries. Always in the margins. Always undated. Phrases like sound was louder this time. Tide fell too fast. Unusual. Don't whistle back. Each one has the same tone. Not panicked, not poetic, just practical, like reminders. Historians still argue whether these notes were made by an eccentric assistant or possibly a prankster, though the consistency of the handwriting over 20 years makes that unlikely. You show a handwriting expert 3 of the entries. She compares them to the named keepers of those periods. Doesn't match any of them, she concludes. But it's all one hand. You find a final logbook from 1969. Water-stained, cover torn, just 3 weeks' worth of entries before the lighthouse was decommissioned. One last margin note. Don't forget the west lamp. Even if it's not there, you close the book. On impulse, you check the page edges for indentations, faint marks from notes long erased. You find one faint but real. It reads, "It still watches. Even now." They call it the last light. Perched on a sheer cliff, unreachable by road, it hasn't operated in years. But every so often, hikers see a faint beam through the mist, and no one who hikes up to check ever seems to hike back down. The trail isn't marked on modern maps. You find it referenced only once in a 1923 hiker's almanac, tucked between pencil sketches of rock formations and a recipe for boiled tea bread. It mentions a tower above the clouds where the air tastes like old copper and birds fly low. That's all you get. But the cliff exists, jagged and sheer rising like a knife's edge out of the Atlantic, and visible only in certain weather. You spot it during an overcast dawn, a sliver of stone cutting through fog with the faintest dot at its tip. You hike toward it. The trailhead is barely there. Just a gap in the scrub and the memory of boot prints. You follow switchbacks that seem to loop in slightly different patterns every time you glance down. The air grows colder, thinner. Moss creeps in from the edges of the path, covering rock and root alike. It takes hours, and when you reach the top, the tower is there. Not broken, not crumbling, just still. No sound, no birds, no wind, just the lighthouse, its windows blanket storage are. Inside, it's empty. Not abandoned empty. No dust, no spiderwebs, no rust on the hinges, and the lamp unlit. But the lens is warm. You climb the steps, slowly, each one silent beneath your feet. You reach the top and look out. Sea, fog, nothing else. You glance at the lamp. It flickers, then steadies. You didn't touch it. Historians don't talk about this tower. It's not listed among active sites or historic restorations. Even satellite scans miss it half the time. Locals call it the last light you'll see, usually with a shrug, as if it's just a story or a place someone else told them about. But here it is. And as the lamp pulses softly, one slow rhythm, you feel the pressure of the cliff behind you. Not from danger, just presence, like the land itself is watching. You take a step back. The floor feels firm. You leave before sunset. Back at your lodging, you check the camera you wore. No photos, no signal, no GPS trail. But the soles of your boots are red with cliff clay, clay found only at that elevation. You try to return 3 days later. The trail's gone, not overgrown. Gone. Just one last note logged anonymously in a forgotten ledger, light active again. Hiker passed upward, not seen since. And now, the trail behind you softens. The stones of each tower fade from memory, and the sea, once full of riddles, returns to its slow, sleepy hush. Whatever watched from behind the glass has lowered its gaze for the night. The steps no longer echo. The lanterns flicker low. You're back on solid ground, now boots dry, breath calm, head wrapped in a fog, more comfortable than strange. That journal, the one with initials but no name, stays closed. The bell above the sea falls silent. You've walked with keepers forgotten, climbed towers misplaced, and listened for whispers in margins that never meant to be read. But the last light has gone dim. The door at the base stays shut, and the west lamp, well, best not to worry about that now. So curl into your blanket, breathe in deep, and let the tide in your thoughts drift quiet. There's no more to see tonight. But if this journey stirred something in you, some echo, some question, don't let it end here. Subscribe for more forgotten paths, untold relics, and the stories that time tried to bury. Leave a comment below. What part of the voyage stayed with you the most? And if you know someone who would listen for bells beneath the sea, share this with them. The tide will rise again soon. Be here when it does.